Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Good morning and welcome to today's meeting of the Fire, Resilience and Emergency Planning Committee. Can I make a special welcome to the Politics Master students from Aston University in Birmingham, who I think are up in the audience. There they are. And we're also going to be joined later this morning by St. Joachim's Catholic Primary School in Newham. May I please remind participants to silence your devices. Members of the public may like to follow at London Assembly on Twitter and use the hashtag AssemblyFire for this meeting. On the agenda today is a discussion on London Fire Brigade training. Before we begin, we have a few small items of business. Can I ask our clerk, Diane Richards, to confirm any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for absence have been received from Assemblymember Duval and also from Assemblymember Sheikh, for whom Assemblymember McCartney will be joining us shortly as a substitute.
Thank you. And can we note the list of offices held by Assembly members?
Noted.
And can I also ask members if they have any disclosable pecuniary interests in specific items listed on the agenda? There are none. Can we note the membership of and chairing arrangements for this committee as agreed by the London Assembly at its annual meeting on the 4th of May 2023?
Noted.
And can we note the committee's terms of reference as agreed by the London Assembly at its annual meeting on 4th of May 2023?
Noted.
And can we note the standing delegations of authority to me as chair of this committee as set out on the agenda?
Noted.
And can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of March 2023?
Agreed.
And can we note the completed and outstanding actions arising from previous meetings of this committee?
Noted.
And can we note the action taken by me as chair under delegated authority in consultation with party group lead members, namely to agree the committee's response to the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities consultation on sprinklers in care homes, removal of national classes and staircases in residential buildings? Okay, we now move on to our main item, a discussion on London Fire Brigades training. A very big welcome to our guests. Today we have Jonathan Smith, who's the Deputy Commissioner of the London Fire Brigade, Keeley Foster, Assistant Commissioner, Learning and Professional Development, London Fire Brigade, Joanna Rayson, Managing Director of Training, Babcock International Training, and Gareth Beaton, Regional Chair for London of the Fire Brigades Union. Okay, I will kick off with the questions, and then as we go on, other Assembly members will be asking questions of our panel. The first question is to you, Jonathan. The HMIC-FRS recommended that, quote, the brigade needs to train all staff properly for their roles, including developing all levels of leadership and management competence. How does your organizational and professional development strategy achieve this?
No, thank you. Good morning. I think the strategy that obviously this committee has had sight of is part of our overall improvement journey that we've been on really since, very critical HMI reports that were levelled against the brigade in 2019 and then again last year, set against the context of the Grenfell Phase 1 recommendations that also came out, which very much had a pointed steer towards the training offer that we give to all of our staff, actually, regardless of their role. And I think it's important to set it within that context. If you look at some of the significant training interventions that have been made, certainly since 2019, around what our high-rise offer now looks like, what our fire survival guidance offer now looks like, what our response to terrorism now looks like, which has been referenced in the Lord Harris review in terms of our preparedness. I think the risk-critical element, I think we're getting much better. I think there's an absolute legitimate area for us to concentrate on, which is picked up within the strategy around the leadership training and the behaviours that we expect to see of our staff at all levels of the organisation. So if you look at one of the key components within that strategy around the OLMs, the organisational learning model, which not only talks to the specific risk-critical skills that everybody needs to have, it also references the competencies and the behaviours of leaders across the organisation and what we would expect. Now, we're not there yet. That is a 2-year strategy. That's on top of a lot of the risk-critical priorities that we've had to identify, certainly in the post-Grenfell world. And obviously this committee has touched on areas around wildfire and the challenges that we face around new and emerging technology, lithium-ion batteries in particular. So these are areas that we absolutely have to focus on because they're risk-critical. But in terms of taking the brigade in the direction of travel that we need from a cultural perspective and from a leadership perspective, those other leadership skills are also critical. So far, for example, we've put through 130 of our senior leaders through inclusive leadership training. That's now happened post the cultural review. We've got over 1,000 sub-officers and station officers and their equivalent ranks in control and in FRS departments have been through a leadership conversation that was held at headquarters in response to the cultural review and actually for people to understand their critical leadership role in taking that forward. We've got the leadership offer across the board now in terms of the Frank Bailey leadership programme, the Gillian Tanner leadership programme that we expect all of our leaders to go on. Myself, I've been on the inclusive leadership training programme that goes all the way up to director level, all the way down to supervisory level, and it's really at that level that we're really concentrating our efforts because that's probably where we're going to get most bang for our buck. So the actual strategy itself is very much part of the overarching journey that we've been on. There's been the risk-critical elements that we had to deal with as a result of Grenfell and very pointed tactical failings that we had around risk-critical training, around driving and incident command. We're in a much stronger position as far as that's concerned. It's now about the broader ask across the organisation that captures things like behaviours that will then engender the type of culture that we all want to see within London Fire Brigade.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Gareth, over to you. What is the FBU view of the strategy, and is there anything you would like to change about it?
Thank you, Chair. I think the issues for the FBU are there's been recommendations from various bodies, the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 1, the HMI, the Manchester Arena Inquiry, the fires from July last year, which were clear to see that wildfires coming into the urban environment and how we need firefighters to be trained for that and have the right number of firefighters with the right equipment, right training and the right appliances, etc. for that, the cultural review. But all of this has happened, these recommendations and these additional fires and the changing environment with no additional funding from central government. And it's just horrendous. We can't continue like this. The London Fire Brigade can't continue like this without more funding. And central government need to realise that. They need to assist the Greater London Authority, the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor with their funding, because that's the big thing. So we need more drivers. We know that we need more drivers. there isn't the capacity. We need more firefighters because we've got appliances unavailable due to lack of skills and lack of firefighters. We need more firefighters trained, but it comes at a cost. And how the LFB do that, it needs to be properly funded, and that is a really big issue. You know, London is compared to other cities in the UK. It's not. It's comparable to Paris in size, the London Fire Brigade, New York in size. You know, and we need to look at it properly and to get proper funding. That's the big issue.
Thank you very much for that. Keeley, over to you. What progress has been made in delivering the new organisational and professional development strategy? And are you planning to publish a progress report to tell us how you're doing?
Thank you. Good morning. Yes, we're moving forward, obviously, with the strategy. It was a 2-year strategy to set the baseline of requirements and, as Jonathan has said, outlines the concept for the organisational learning model. So what we've done within that strategy initially is to start to do an assurance mapping process. So that is due for the end of May and will shortly be implemented after that. That looks at a really detailed evaluation and assurance process, evaluation piece based on the Kirkpatrick model, and then subsequently the assurance process aligned to our internal assurance team framework to subsequently look at the 3 lines of defence with regards to assurance and making sure that we scrutinise all process practice and subsequently risk and put the adequate controls in place for all of our training. Secondly, looking at sort of streamlining of particular processes within the department, in particular the training design and implementation process, so that is more effective and efficient and actually gets training to the front line in a far quicker way, but works really detailed and closely with the commissioning departments. Subsequently is scrutinised alongside the FBU within a meeting to look at the health and safety aspects and make sure it meets its aims and objectives, but also within the design process as well to look at the various methods of delivery to really look at aspects such as neurodiversity, learner needs, but subsequently then just make sure through working alongside Babcock design team that we choose the best methods that give us the greatest effects and meet those aims and objectives. And lastly, the aspects that is moving forward initially is from the 1st of June, we will be rolling out the appraisal process. This is an interim approach. The reason why it's interim is we're looking at the longer term aspects of building other elements of the OLM into that appraisal that will look at a skills matrix and also the competency-based training framework. But from the 1st of June, we'll have a recording process in place that will be pushed out to all staff across the organisation, and subsequently, initially that will set in elements such as looking at check-ins, the well-being of our staff, subsequently looking at a review progress, looking at basically their progress against work objectives, but most importantly as well is looking at their development and aspirations as well, and subsequently then just being able to record that and have a centrally based recording process, which is not something we've had recently, and is a good step forward for implementation.
Thank you for that. And how are you engaging with staff on their experience with the new learning model?
So the engagement process will be ongoing as part of the project for the organisational learning model. That's got a number of component parts because the OLM itself is just a concept. So we will be engaging further as that moves forward with the skills matrix and competency-based training framework. In the initial stages, we've gone through engagement with what is the first step, which is that appraisal process, and subsequently then we've taken a series of working with staff groups. So that is through equality support groups that we've met with and sense-checked that, and we'll be doing some user testing very shortly. We've met with the unions, including the FBU, subsequently top management group, to look at it and how it sort of feeds down through basically the management levels, and subsequently with fire stations as well. So we're moving forward with that. But that's the first part of engagement. There is more to do after that.
Okay, thank you. And Gareth, how do your members feel about the development of the OLM and the engagement in particular?
I've had no issues reported to me in the development of the OLM thus far. The main issues that we are getting across our desks for training is training when firefighters are off duty, being asked to come in and to do training on off-duty days when it's their rota days, well-deserved breaks that they should be having, and being asked to go in for training. We've at the FBU position in London, that's not suitable and sufficient. They shouldn't be. We do appreciate the changes with training on the watch for some courses, for breathing apparatus training, for example. I think there's more that could be done for that, and we want more training on duty days and less or none on off-duty time. That's the biggest amount of complaints that we're getting through from London firefighters.
Okay. Jonathan.
Yeah, I think Gareth makes a very fair point. I think one of the things that all four of us actually are really in agreement on, in terms of how can we make the training provision work better for our, the majority of our workforce who are working on fire stations. It was one of the reasons why we pushed very hard for watch-based training, because it makes complete sense that rather than take individuals from individual fire stations to a central location, actually you train as a watch together, preferably at your fire station. So one of the things we are looking at is how we can better use our estate. So there's a new estate strategy that's coming forward, because we've got some fantastic fire stations within the geography of the M25 that we don't make best use of at the moment. It's concentrated on central locations. So, we meet regularly with Jo and her team every 2 weeks, myself and Keeley, because we're really keen, as we move into the second half of the Babcock contract, that we introduce more flexibility into the contract. One of the big advantages of that will be that actually we train in our locations rather than bring people into centrally held locations, because the opportunity is there to do that. It also just makes much more practical sense that the people you're going to expect to work with operationally are who you train with on a day-to-day basis. So I think we're all in violent agreement on that one, that is a direction of travel that we want to work in. And, credit to Jo and her team in Babcock. We're having some really positive conversations about how do we make that happen and move that forward as quickly as possible, because the advantages are clear for everyone to see.
Yeah, I mean, that seems very obvious to me, that you do. Is there a reason it's taken so long to get to that point, as opposed to calling people in centrally on their days that they're meant to be off rota? Is it that suddenly now that would be happening, as opposed to having always happened that way?
Yeah, I think we've had an opportunity really to take a bit of a step back and look at our training offer across the board. One of the things that sits within the strategy is in fact the department that Keeley now has responsibility for, now has oversight of training across the whole of the organisation, whereas before one of the criticisms that was levelled against it was really simply a commissioning department for the Babcock contract rather than looking at training across the board. Now that's a critical role that Keeley's team have, but it's broader than that. And I think we've been able to take a step back, look at how we can deliver our training in a much more efficient and effective way. To be fair, Babcock are up for the conversation now in terms of how, when we go into the second half, we can really build flexibility into it. And it's linked to the point that Gareth was making before about the risk profile that we now find going forward. When you think that the contract was first signed back in 2012, the world is a very different place now than when it was then. The risk has evolved significantly. This is pre-Grenfell. This is pre the 2017 terror attacks that the capital was exposed to. It was pre all the wildfire issues that we've discussed at length at this committee and elsewhere. So actually what that means is we need additional agility into the contract to be able to respond to those risks as and when they emerge. And I think we're all in real agreement on that, and there's a big opportunity for us now moving forward to put that into practice and make that happen.
Thank you. Gareth, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There's one other thing I wanted to slot in, which is the old process, which was called a TCAP. So if you wanted a new training course of some description about something, the time it takes. There is a new version now. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but I'm really interested to know if that can be speeded up, because the time it takes for a new training course is a constant problem and a battle. So we need new training on X, but it takes 18 months before we can actually start training London members and LFB firefighters. That's not good.
Keeley.
Yeah, thank you. Gareth's quite right on that point. One of my frustrations was exactly that, and that's what I referred to earlier, was regarding the training design and implementation process, the TDI process, which has replaced the TCAP process. One of the challenges I put to the team was to look at those key milestones within that process mapping, and subsequently the time it takes to get through each step, and it was far too long to be able to actually, as a learning organisation, to be able to get that from the commissioning department, or to inject some learning that is risk critical and subsequently then push that through to the front line and see those outcomes. So we have challenged that. We have reduced that time frame, and that is something that I can share equally with the committee, as well as we'll be sharing that with the FBU as well, and we're in the final stages of that process.
Okay, thank you. And then finally for you, Keeley, are you now able to assess an individual's level of competence and assess their training requirements?
Yeah, sure. We have, through our central reporting, we are able to map that across to individuals and teams, particularly to ascertain core skills, competencies. Subsequently, that's held centrally. It's through our central reporting mechanisms, but subsequently what we haven't got at the moment, which we will have as part of the competency-based training framework, is to be able to push that out, to have that really transparent and open system whereby to maintain and promote professional standards, every part of the organisation will be able to see the skills that are associated with their role, and subsequently the competencies that are associated with their role as well. So not only centrally will we be able to keep up to date with the frequency of those, and in particular looking at revalidation around core elements and making sure that people are within tickets. We have the licence to operate model that will be rolled out, but subsequently then we'll be able to push that out really clearly in an open process, using the appraisal as well, so that managers and staff will have a really clear expectation of what is expected of them within their role and what they need to maintain and keep their competency levels in ticket as they go forward. So that will be rolled out, and that is part of the OLM concept.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm now going to bring in Assembly Member Bakari, who's going to ask questions on the findings of the Independent Culture Review.
Thank you, Chair. Nazir Afzal criticised the London Fire Brigade for its training provision and said it needed a major review and a reshape of training and development culture at the LFB. So let's talk specifically about what Nazir said in his report and how you've moved on from that. So if we can focus on Jonathan Keeley to begin with. What specific types of new training have you introduced since the review, specifically on his recommendations to address some of those concerns that he had?
Yeah, good morning. Yes, I think from that, it'll be fair to say it was a very challenging report. All of the recommendations within, obviously, we fully accept. Subsequently then we have made steps then to push out training to staff at all levels, and we're moving at pace with that. And that follows, various forms. That follows the sort of baseline education of staff around legislation and particular aspects where they're associated with protected characteristics and legislation surrounding equalities. But more importantly, what we have done is contextualise that within the LFB environment, and particularly looking at culture, to bring various staff groups together in different formats and actually make those, sessions very much interactive. Both John and I have been through those, and that is not a tick box exercise by any means. It is very interactive, and it really does challenge each individual within that room, and subsequently is a very reflective process. We've got various levels of that, and obviously all of the ED&I is embedded within our leadership programs, but then we've got specific areas that we focus on that take staff through neurodiversity, managing stress, anxiety, and recognising stress, anxiety and depression, but also the leading culture conversations, again, which are very, very important, a real eye-opener for staff, all of which have been received very, very much positively by staff, and actually have really put some challenging scenarios within the room for staff to talk about and address. I think it'd be fair to say that my experience of coming into the organisation and my day-to-day experience is maybe very different to John's from underrepresented, well, two groups. But subsequently, you know, we need to get those experiences out in the open, and it's been very well received, and I've got every faith that actually those conversations will keep going, and it's been a really worthwhile and valuable piece of training so far.
Yeah. Jonathan.
No, thank you. Just to add to that, as well as the ED&I training that's been rolled out, and of course ED&I now is a central part of our promotion process, you know, up to Deputy Commissioner, so I went through a very rigorous ED&I process as part of the promotion process that we went through, and that filters through all the way through the organisation. So ED&I is now real, you know, it's real for people's career progression. It's not something we can pay lip service to, or it's something that's a tick box exercise. It's absolutely fundamental to how the organisation is going to move forward. The other element that's picked up within Nazir Afzal's report is around mental health training and provision of mental health. Now, as we sit at the moment, we've now got 200 mental health first aiders, so the ambition is to make sure that we've got a mental health first aider on every watch and in every team in the organisation. I am the Director Ally for Mental Health, opened up the event that we held at headquarters on Monday because it's Mental Health Awareness Week, as I'm sure colleagues will be aware. That is something that we really want to focus on. I think nearly 900 members of staff now have been through managing stress, anxiety and depression recognition as leadership, so they can understand when they start to see that in their teams. That's something we've got to be relentless about because, as well, this committee will know, you know, there's a real mental health epidemic across society, actually, not just particularly in London Fire Brigade, and that's something we have to be very reflective of and make sure that we're vigilant, because it does cause a lot of the issues that you saw within the cultural review. And the other big element, of course, is around the training offer for fire and rescue service staff who felt like second-class citizens, essentially, when you read through the report, which was something that Nazir Afzal referenced quite heavily. And that's where the OLM really does come in, because it maps out across every role within the organisation. So it doesn't matter whether you work in procurement or property, or if you're part of the General Counsel legal team. Your core competencies are mapped out, and there's a proper development and career progression for whatever the role is within the organisation. So still work to do, but moving in the right direction as far as the particular areas around training that were referenced within the cultural review itself.
You've covered quite a lot there, and I'm really pleased to hear about the mental health training that you're providing. And I mean, I know that this has been something that we've talked about before, but the mental health aspect, do you feel as if you are covering the concerns that came from the culture review that related specifically on the racism and the misogyny that he described in terms of that impact on the mental health, rather than the job itself? Because I know that this is something that you guys have already been working on, but specifically on racism and misogyny and homophobia.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't claim for 1 minute to think that we've got it all right at the moment. I think there's still a number of areas that we've got to be relentlessly focused on going forward, including the challenges around race and gender and sexuality, and we've still got work to do. I think one of the things we have done, though, is the equality support groups. We've now brought them into a central team where actually this is their full-time role now, to advise actually senior leaders like myself in terms of more work we can do to actually improve the lived experience of everyone who's working not only on our fire stations but across the organisation. So we've got 2 officers in particular focused on mental health. We've got officers focused on issues to do with race. We've got officers focused on issues to do with gender and sexuality. And the idea of having that central team advising myself directly as the Deputy Commissioner is that all of our policy, procedure, ways of working comes through that lens to make sure that even when it's unintended consequences, we're actually taking into account the views of everybody within the organisation. And that's something we've got to be really relentless about going forward, because I don't pretend for one moment we're where we need to be, but I think the fact that we've got that team within the central provision of fire stations in particular, advising senior officers like myself in terms of how we can take this forward in the right way is a big step forward. And colleagues, to be fair, in the Fire Brigades Union, holding our feet to the fire as well on all of this. You will have seen, I'm sure Gareth would talk to this, that the FBU nationally have launched a big campaign around the behaviours and culture that they want to see engendered across fire and rescue services nationally, and that's certainly something we would support and recognise.
Yeah, let's bring Gareth in, if that's okay. It'll be good to get your perspective and from terms of your members as well on their response to the changes that have been made since.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. So there's a couple of points I'd like to make. The first one is that so part of my role, I sit on the staff side covering all your trade unions at the Brigade Joint Committee for Health, Safety and Welfare. So once the cultural review was published, we requested 2 months ago that the mental health policy in London be reviewed, and I still haven't had confirmation that that's happening. So I urge that I get that tomorrow, because the BJCHSW meets tomorrow. Now that policy must be reviewed following the cultural review.
So it's 2 years late, did you say?
No, 2 months.
2 months, sorry. Okay.
So 2 months. So the last 2 months, I formally requested it be reviewed.
Right.
And I'm still waiting for confirmation that policy, the mental health policy in the London Fire Brigade, will be reviewed. So I'd appreciate that is something that happens as a matter of urgency, really. Okay. We appreciate the LFB's approach to we've got FBU reps from our sectional committees and sectional groups that are detached into the LFB, working full-time now within the culture review and the change part. It's a big change for London firefighters. London firefighters are appreciative of what's been recommended. They know there are some instances of things, not only in London but across the country in fire and rescue services. You know, we've seen lots of news reports of that. The FBU conference met last week, and we had various policies and resolutions, and a National Executive Council policy statement was agreed at conference as well on the way forward for the FBU and how the FBU and equalities and how we work towards that nationally. So we're waiting for information to come following the conference last week on how we're going to sort of address that across every individual fire and rescue service across the country. So it's very new, it's moving. We've got a national committee as well working on the cultural review with the national FBU and London and national sectional representatives, and a few of us from the London Regional Executive, so even myself or the EC member David Shingshek, for example. We will attend that meeting and see what the national FBU are processing and what's going on and how the recommendations are going through the culture review in London.
So I'm really pleased to see that the work going forward from the FBU's perspective, but I have got a concern that a lot of the reports coming into the culture review that Nazir Afzal did, from the reading of it, and even since then, the people who talked about their experiences must have at some point gone to the union and said, this is what's happening, I'm not being listened to, my managers are behaving like this. At that point, what do the FBU do? How do they deal with those situations? Because it feels to me as if something has been happening in your place of work, I would go to my union and ask them for support. Where was that support?
So absolutely 100% the support was there. Prior to the cultural review, I approached on numerous occasions the LFB and the assistant commissioner, or no, not assistant director, it would have been Richard Mills at the time, and two reviews were done, one into the northeast area of London, into allegations that were made by FBU members into the bullying culture in the northeast of London. That was done and completed. I've also had 2 other investigations taken place from various female officers and female firefighters that I took directly to the commissioner that were investigated. So absolutely, if we get approached by our members, we will go directly to commissioner and deputy commissioner level, and we have done and will continue to do so.
And has there been a full assessment of the union itself in terms of their own training and EDI policies, assessment on their own diversity within their own ranks?
So that is part of the conference motions last week and the National Executive Council policy statement. That will all be coming now. That went through conference last week, that yes, the FBU will be doing that. Do
you feel that there are things to improve in terms of your diversity within the union itself?
There is always always room for improvement, I would say.
Would you have any data in terms of how many women, how many people from ethnic minorities are part of the kind of, staffing of the?
So,
of the
as in representatives and trade union reps, I can get that for you
that would be
if
great.
you request it.
Yeah, it gives us a better picture, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because if members are coming to you with their concerns, they want to feel as if they're being understood on all aspects, and that it's not just like we were talking about tick box exercises. We want people to feel like they are being listened to, and there's empathy within the union itself when they're making their concerns and their complaints too.
Absolutely. And the national BEAM representatives are both London firefighters. The national LGBT plus representative, she's a London firefighter. So we do have, and the National Women's Committee, some of their members are London firefighters as well. So there is a good, across London, definitely, there is a good representation there. But I mean, if you want that information, I'll have to request
I'll
that.
be keen to pick up on that again another time. Joanna, can I bring you in? I was looking at your career in diversity itself, and your work and wanting to work in mentoring programs, and that specifically kind of caught my eye. Have you had a response in terms of what you've seen from the culture review, seen a need maybe for this type of approach for the LFB, having a mentoring scheme?
Morning, everybody. I'm passionate about equality and diversity. Hopefully you've seen that in the biography. I mean, very keen to support the LFB in terms of what we can do proactively to respond to the culture review. I am personally a big fan of mentoring. I think it works. I'm part of the Women in Defence mentoring programme, so certainly something we could look about, and certainly within Babcock we have mentoring programmes as well. In terms of how we're equipping our trainers to respond to the culture review, we've done a couple of things. There is a piece around making sure that they were fully briefed, working collaboratively with the LFB on what the findings are, because ultimately we want the training environment to be reflective of the culture that the LFB is striving to achieve. That's really important. We also have a significant number of mental health first aiders in the workplace, so they are equipped to deal and support should that be required. And finally, we're doing from a CPD perspective some piece around stress management as well, because I think that's quite critical. And also the whistleblowing helplines, so where people can go should they see something that is not aligned culturally to where we want to go. And again, that's been in collaboration with the LFB. So I think mentoring, I think there is a part to play in that. I think there's definitely an opportunity for people to get support that's outside of their direct line management chain, and we would always be welcome the opportunity to partner with the LFB should they want to do that, to look at introducing something like that.
Yeah, because one of the things I noted in some of the recommendations from the culture review, where there were people who were saying that the training did not really impact the real community engagement aspect. There's a quote: "We stumble and drag our feet to go to an event without doing any real research or engagement with hard-to-reach community groups." A mentoring scheme would mean that you would have people outside of the LFB as well involved and getting a real understanding of your local community groups. Would you not agree?
Potentially that's one avenue to do that, yes.
And that's the model that you'll be going forward with, is that, do you think, with the next steps?
I think that would need to be an LFB decision. If we were looking, we absolutely look to support that, but ultimately, I mean, we do things entirely within Babcock. I guess what we're talking here more about is what the impact from an LFB perspective. But yes, absolutely look at the opportunity to expand that, should that be something we want to take forward.
Yeah, just one of the things that Keeley and I are looking at the moment actually is around the FFD provision and what that looks like and how we can take that forward. And at the moment we've got an in-house interface team who welcome our new recruits as they come in on day one, and we've got them for 2 weeks before they then go to Plaistow and go through the formal training with Babcock instructors. And we're looking potentially about an additional week at the end of that where they come back into LFB, and then we can actually work with them in terms of their integration onto station, and that will include things like the new approach to community engagement, which obviously we've discussed here as part of the community risk management plan. That actually the way that we do community engagement now is changing. We're moving away from what in the past has been quite a parental approach to actually asking the right questions in the right place, and most importantly, listening to the answers that we receive back, and that sits within the borough risk management plans, which are now live on our site in terms of how we're going to keep doing that continuous engagement. Well, I think the point you make is a very fair one, and I think there is an opportunity now as we look at our FFD offer across the board, because one of the things we're all determined at is that we don't have a two-tier approach to our FFD provision, that actually is all one team. The fact that our new entrants into the organisation are trained by Babcock, the fact that there's an interface team that are LFB officers, actually it should just all be one team. It doesn't make a difference whether or not you're wearing a Babcock uniform or an LFB uniform, and I think that's an area of opportunity for us moving forward, which I know Joe and colleagues in Babcock are keen to explore.
I understand that Assemblymember Bailey wants to come in as well.
Assemblymember Hall and then Assemblymember Bailey.
Thank you. Following on from something that Assemblymember Bakari said, Gareth, when firefighters are investigated from the culture review and other things, which is quite right when they have to be, I accept that, but I get a lot of whistleblowers, and I'm told that it takes a long time to investigate some of these officers. Is that correct?
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Yes, we are aware of some investigations taking a very long time. We've got members that are suspended, not at work, whilst the LFB investigation is continuing, and some of them have been for a considerable amount of time.
How long?
I'm aware of one that's taken over 190 days. That's one just off the top of my head. I'm not too sure about the others. Probably similar amounts of time.
Jonathan.
Yes, no, I mean, in terms of the length of time, obviously the most serious cases are the ones that result in a suspension, and one of the things we're very keen to do is to move those cases through as quickly as possible. Now, obviously, one of the things that fell out the back of the culture review was around the requirement. Essentially, people had lost faith in the HR transactional element within people's services, particularly around how we deal with complaints, how we deal with discipline, how we deal with grievance. So we brought in an independent company called CMP who now do that for us on our behalf. Now, obviously, that part of the rationale for bringing them in was to restore trust in the actual process. I think we'd all be the first to acknowledge that some of, particularly the more difficult and challenging cases, are still taking too long to work their way through the process, both in terms of the CMP investigations that are going on at the moment, and then subsequently the recommendations that they will bring forward to London Fire Brigade. And then obviously that's for us, senior officers within the brigade, to then take all of the information that CMP have brought forward and then move through with the investigations. So there are a number of very high profile cases at the moment that are taking too long. I would be the first to acknowledge that, and we're bringing in additional resource within the People Services Department to actually try and move some of those through. But there's also we've had some actually really good feedback from some of the more lower level cases that come through, that actually the way the process has actually played out through CMP, there's a confidential complaints line, their interaction with the investigators from CMP has actually been very, very good, and actually we've ended up with a good result at the end. But I completely accept that, particularly for the very serious cases that are by their very nature more complex to investigate, that's still taking too long, and that's something we're determined to improve.
So how many would you say are very serious cases?
So I think the last figure, and we published the figures in terms, because that was the other element that we were transparent. I think that the last figures that I saw, we're up to 10 suspensions at the moment, and those are, of course, the most serious cases. And they're all in various stages of the investigation process. Some have just been suspended. Others have been suspended, as Gareth has alluded to, for a period of time. But they're all being independently investigated by CMP, and we're still working that relationship through between the independent investigator and then what LFB does to take those investigations forward.
Yeah, you see, there's so many problems here. First, Gareth is saying we need far more firefighters. If they're not working, that's not helpful. But personally, for those people, if they are guilty, then they need to be dealt with. If they're not, they're going through a living hell, waiting for a decision to be made. So it's so totally unfair to those firefighters.
Yeah, and I wouldn't defend the position in terms of the length of time it's taken to work through those investigations. You're absolutely right, Assemblymember Hall. I mean, all of those firefighters and officers and members of FRS staff as well who have been suspended do have welfare provision wrapped around them. They've all got contact officers who keep them updated as far as the CMP investigations is concerned. But I think it is probably also worth just setting it in the context in terms of the sheer number of complaints that came in following the culture review when it actually landed. So we've discussed before in this forum the Safe to Speak scheme, which in an 18-month period I think had only had 24 complaints through that scheme. Well, since the review landed at the end of November, we're in excess of 200, some of which, at the most extreme end, are actually very, very complicated cases to work through. But none of that is an excuse. We need to actually make sure that our interaction with CMP is bringing forward the recommendations that people have brought to hearing, and then they're dealt with appropriately once we know what that is. And it's still taking too long. I can't defend that.
So when do you think you'll be able to say to me, it's not taking too long, we've caught up?
Well, we've brought in additional resource into the People Services Department. So there's a number of people that we've brought in who have got real HR transactional expertise, particularly around investigations, discipline, grievance, complaints. We're waiting to see they're coming back with a set of proposals in terms of how we're going to restructure people services in the very near future to actually do some of the basic, because some of what we're talking about here is about basic HR provision within that department. We've got to fix those basics to get people into a position where we can make decisions around disciplinary and grievance cases based on sound information and people have got trust in the system. And I'm expecting that to come forward over the course of the next few weeks. I'm the Senior Responsible Officer for something that's called Programme 5, which is part of our transformation journey as an organisation. But one of the projects that sits within there is around the transformation of people services to actually get it into a much better position than it currently is. But it requires additional resource, and it's clearly something the committee are going to keep coming back to, and rightly so.
Well, of course, and it's also costing. I mean, it may cost to sort it, but it's costing you paying for those firefighters, and they're not on duty, and it's costing them their mental health, I would suggest, because they don't know what's going to happen to them. I'll leave it there for time. Thank you.
Assemblymember Bailey, did you still have a quick question?
Yes, I do. Gareth, what has the union changed since the cultural review? Because the cultural review, some of the findings were absolutely horrendous. You've had the Safe to Speak line, which seems to be reasonably busy, and there's been a large number of complaints since then, but none of this was being championed by the union. So Assemblymember Bakari asked a question about the support. Do you feel like you as a union are supporting your members properly, bearing in mind you brought none of this into the public arena?
Thank you. So, yeah, as I said before, we've historically we have actually raised some serious concerns with previous deputy commissioners and the commissioner at the time, and there have been ongoing investigations. Some of them have been were complaints that were re-investigated and were to be redone, but unfortunately due to some legal ramifications around it, that was unable to happen. But we have constantly been raising issues in the past, and actually the National Joint Council made recommendations, I can't remember the exact date, in the 90s. The FBU made recommendations that there needs to be review of culture across the fire service nationally. So we have been saying it for some considerable time, and we do and will continue to fully support our members if they have any issues at work.
Do you feel like you were a big enough part of, because saying it in the 90s, I think everybody who has anything to do with the fire brigade has realised these problems have been entrenched for years, hence the use of the word culture. But it just seems to me that you may have pursued individual cases, but what were you doing as a union to pursue this whole question of culture? Because it's your members affecting your members, and surely that gives you the right and the responsibility to bring it up regularly and with some force to force some change, because this change seems to have come from somewhere other than the union.
So it wasn't an FBU investigation. We made the employers aware of significant issues on numerous occasions. We then pushed and pushed and pushed for it to take place and things to take place. We worked with Nazir within the culture review into London. There are now further investigations going on around the country, but it was an LFB culture review. It wasn't the FBU's culture review. I appreciate that, but we have always been a champion union for equalities and members' rights, and we will always continue to be.
Okay, Chair, I'll back to you in just a time.
We'll let Assemblymember
Thank you.
Bakari finish off her
Yeah,
question.
I'll just wrap up. The last kind of area of question is on the evaluation of the effectiveness of EDI training, and it will be good to know in terms of how you're going to assess. Particularly, I'm interested in the middle management section of your training. I mean, I was really shocked when I was reading into it that, you know, you mentioned tick box exercises, but also the fact that there were managers allowing training to be allowed if you just watched a screen and a few of you in the room are watching it with you, and then you're like, yeah, you've done your training, or just having a poster in the staff room was enough to say that you've done your EDI training. What are you going to do to make sure that it is no longer a tick box exercise, that it really is a successful change, and that those middle managers are not missed out in that particular aspect of the training?
Yes, thank you. I think going back to your previous point about community engagement, first and foremost, a community engagement team are making sure that that end is covered off by doing some detailed workshops with our middle managers, borough commanders and station commanders, and making sure that they really understand community needs and start to broaden that out into aspects of ED&I as well. Subsequently, yes, going back to the tick box element, you know, we want to move away from that. There is, of course, as I've said previously, you know, an understanding and education around the baseline requirements and legislation that everybody needs. But as we've said, all of that EDI process is now embedded within all promotional aspects as well. So every time an individual goes for promotion, that is heavily scrutinised within that assessment process to make sure that they are demonstrating the right behaviours with regards to inclusive leadership. Again, you know, scrutinising that through the appraisal process as well to make sure that, you know, we have fully inclusive leaders going forward, and that isn't just you know, the ability to regurgitate what is in that behavioural framework as well. That is a real understanding and evidence-based aspect, so that we can really scrutinise, you know, from every level how they lead their staff right through to the community aspect, and we can make sure that they understand that thread all the way through and nothing is missed. So I think, you know, I'm confident we're in the early stages of it. You know, the leading culture conversations as well, to make sure that those individuals not only attend those sessions but subsequently can take those and are able to go out and actually lead those conversational pieces with their staff as well is really important. But, you know, we're enhancing this as we go forward. It's not something for, you know, in any stretch of the imagination that is going to be a tick box. We'll do this particular aspect of training and then it's left and we've covered that off. This is an ongoing process now. And, you know, being a real champion of this area and actually being, you know, involved previously with the equality support groups, you know, it is my job as well from a point of view of training and also working with our Babcock colleagues as well to make sure that this ED&I is embedded through all of our training that we do, and it isn't just a standalone aspect. It is picked up in every training intervention going forward.
Jonathan, can you also reassure me about the way you're going to do this continuous assessment?
The key to this is actually what the data is going to tell us in terms of and how this is measured going forward, which is how we will be held to hard account in terms of the delivery against all of this, because otherwise it becomes, you know, a nice set of words that don't actually deliver tangible outcomes. We know that the data doesn't lie. The data will tell us the story around people coming through the promotion process to making sure that that properly reflects the demography of London. It will tell us the story of our recruits coming through the firefighter development programme. You know, we're funny, today's the last day of our people survey, you know, and we're looking at introducing pulse surveys throughout the year to actually sense check what this looks like across the organisation. And that's so critically important because, yes, you have to look at both qualitative and quantitative data, but actually that does tell you a story about your organisation, and then you can use that to really drive change.
In that quantitative data, will you be looking at numbers of ethnic minority groups, women, people from you know, all backgrounds taking up the voluntary types of training that you're going to be offering, like on for example, drivers? Is that something that you'd be assessing?
Yes, absolutely. So there's you know, this is part of our suite of KPIs that sit under the umbrella of the Community Risk Management Plan as our strategic plan for the organisation, and that filters down to all levels to make sure that we're actually getting a true picture of what the story is across London Fire Brigade. So the data doesn't lie. You know, that tells you a story of your organisation. We haven't always been as good as we should have been in terms of using that data to drive improved performance. We're in a much different space now. To be fair, actually, we've got a whole suite of data in front of us that we didn't have before. You know, we've got a people dashboard, which means at a very granular level you can look at all of your fire stations in London and you can see where you've got particular spikes in sickness, in transfer requests, in discipline and grievance cases, in the information we receive from exit interviews. And what we will expect to see is that our middle managers in particular, who are having that real interface with frontline staff, use that data to understand what the story is that they're being told. And that's something we're going to have to keep coming back to time and time again.
Thank you very much.
Over to Assembly Member McCartney, who's going to take on some further training needs.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to start the section about other training needs that were identified in the culture review. And my first questions are for Keeley, if I can. How is the LFB ensuring managers are equipped to deal with neurodiverse staff?
Thank you. Yes, so we do have a neurodiversity package that's been mandatory, that's been pushed out to all staff to complete. That is between 70 and 80% complete at the moment. So subsequently then that is not only giving them the knowledge and understanding of what neurodiversity brings and the opportunity that brings as well, but subsequently then we're using that subsequently leadership programs as well that touches on aspects of neurodiversity, and we're making sure that people fully understand not only the baseline and actually what that actually means and what they're likely to see and how they can adapt and how for learner outcomes, etc., but subsequently then how they lead those individuals and some of the risks and issues that they may come across, but subsequently how they may support those individuals fully going forward, and all of that is picked up within our leadership programs.
Thank you. And are you surveying those staff to ensure that they do feel that they've been catered for appropriately? Yes,
obviously we've got the, as part of the equality support groups, they are an established group, and subsequently then they are able to feed into the governance process and actually, as part of that, offer real challenge back to the organisation when their needs are not met. And subsequently we ensure that is listened to and that is actioned accordingly. But subsequently it is a group that has grown in number. It is fully supported, and subsequently then, working as well with Babcock within the TDI process, we ensure that all of those aspects, and they feed into that as a group as well. So it isn't just done in isolation. They are part of those working groups so that when we push out training, subsequently they feed into that design process.
Okay, thank you. And then can I ask, with regards to line managers, what's being done to identify and make sure they receive sufficient training so that they are able to access support when they're handling perhaps difficult conversations or staff matters?
Yeah, sure. So some of the leadership programs, and right from the very bottom as well, even the Colin Townsley leadership program touches on being able to have difficult conversations. So that goes all the way through those leadership offerings. And subsequently then it is not just about sort of bog standard leadership theories. It is about putting things into practice and subsequently are very interactive. We need to do more in this space, in particular going back to the earlier points around some of the issues we face within the organisation and being able to build up staff confidence to be able to put in early interventions, but subsequently that is building, but it is a main component of our leadership element.
Thank you. And I think sort of linked to that, the review also identified a lack of training to your staff when they're undertaking community engagement, particularly those soft skills to be able to engage properly with the public. What is being done about that? Is it still an ongoing concern?
I wouldn't say it's a concern. I would say that actually we recognise that, and actually we've acted upon that. So the community engagement team have gone round and they've done a pilot with 9 boroughs Subsequently now they are rolling out workshops to all borough commanders and station commanders, which will subsequently then lead, as John has said earlier, we will start to pick that up with an appraisal conversations. So the expectation is station-based staff will know what their borough risk management plan entails, and subsequently the station plan that drops out of that as well. And that is linked to the community needs. But that is an ongoing piece that's being conducted at the moment alongside our community engagement team.
Okay, thank you. And can I now turn to Jonathan and Joanna, if I can? That one of the concerning things about the review was that, I'm going to quote here, most trainees leave training without even observing or using some primary operational equipment. And they also cited a firefighter who told them he'd not had hot wear before being deployed. What assurance can you give the committee that those firefighters are being appropriately trained before their first deployment?
Yeah, so there's a couple of elements there. So just in terms of the equipment, so obviously what our firefighters in development are doing with Babcock instructors, they're using obviously the appliances that are made available as part of that training program, and there'll be all sorts of different equipment on there. And that follows a pattern in terms of what the equipment they will then expect to face when they get onto fire station. But they won't always be the same, because obviously no single one of our fire stations is the same. You know, we've got fire stations with significant specialist equipment. You know, we've got a different role as well as what you might deem the standard firefighting role. In terms of the ability of the trainers to be able to bring them up to a standard where they can safely go onto a fire station and use that equipment and understand the policy and procedure that would be expected of them, that's in place, you know, and that's the minimum expectation we expect as an organisation, that when our FFDs finish their training with Babcock, that they are ready to go onto a fire station, accepting that there will be nuances and differences depending on which fire station they go on, including some of the kit and equipment that's there. So that doesn't necessarily come as a surprise that somebody who's been through the training program would then go to a fire station and actually there would be different equipment that's there. That's not an unusual thing, and I would expect to see that, because actually the training that's required for new recruits coming into the organisation is different to what you would expect to see when you get onto a fire station, because you're obviously bringing them from a civilian position into a position where they're a competent and capable firefighter. On your point around hot wares, so that's critical, that actually our firefighters are exposed to a hot wear, and that does happen. So that's part of the breathing apparatus course that the Babcock instructors deliver. So I was surprised when I read that. I was surprised to read that, because we do have hot wear capability at Beckton and at Park Royal, and that's part of the breathing apparatus course that actually our trainee firefighters go through. You know, a two-week breathing apparatus course, which consists of operating in a smoke field environment, and it consists of operating in excessive temperatures to make sure that they are prepared when they do go out to a fire station. So I'm, you know, reassured that that's in the position that it needs to be. There's a longer term question, and we've discussed this actually, all of us actually, in terms of what our longer term ambition for firefighting is in the 21st century, in 21st century London. And I think there is a very compelling case for something that we're currently calling urban firefighting, that actually takes it to the next level, that we can actually expose firefighters to more realistic training opportunities than we're currently able to do. Because I think it goes back to the point we were making before about the nature of risk, that we need to make sure that we are exposing all of our frontline operational crews to the most realistic training scenarios that we possibly can. So there's work for us to do in that space. I don't think any of us are content that we are delivering that in the way that we know that we need to going forward. But as far as a baseline level of competence is concerned, and people being safe to operate out on the front line, you know, we are all content that we are in that position.
Thank you. And Joanna, do you have anything to add to that or not? No. Okay, thank you.
I see that Gareth wanted to come in on that one.
Fine, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I actually wanted to move reference back to Susan and Sean's questions, and then I'll come to that. So I've actually got now the policies that went through conference. So I will read out the recommendations and what's going to happen if you're happy with that, Chair. So the Executive Council instructs the Executive Council to develop the Union's work on disability, including neurodiversity, mental health, to widen support for members facing discrimination in these areas, review our fairness and work representation and strengthen equality structures, create a more diverse union and structure, including measures to increase the size of diversity of conference delegations, review regional and brigade structures to consider how they may be made more inclusive, carry out an independent review of cases of internal union disciplinary and all equals that have been carried out, review the process for dealing with complaints for matters of discrimination, harassment and victimisation, continue to develop our education programs to best be able to utilise such issues as equality impact assessments and public sector equality duty requirements. And then there's 2 points on the fire and rescue service nationally. Work with our equality sections and brigade committees to identify and establish best practice standards for the fire and rescue service against which they can be tested and measured. Carry out a review of all fire services, inspecting every service and rating them against such equality standards. And then this came from the London Regional Committee and was taken to conference. That conference instructs the Executive Council to commission an independent review into the FBU on how complaints and concerns raised have been handled. This must be carried out by an external body, and any reps and members who provide information to the review should be allowed to do so anonymously if they choose to do so. And that's to be done by next conference next year. So I wanted to give those reassurances of what the FBU are proposing to do. So sorry to change the subject a bit for you all, but I felt that was important. And then if I can come on to breathing apparatus training, is that all right, Chair? So I think the problem in London is it was recommended to have high-rise training. Yes, the LFB are using some high-rise buildings that are unoccupied, but we don't have in London real fire high-rise training. We still don't, 6 years after Grenfell. You know, the Beckton and Park Roll, yes, they have gas burns and they have real fire burns and so on in there, but it's not high-rise. It's not a high-rise real fire training. We still haven't got that.
So I presume in high-rise, it's more risky because you've got stairs to navigate and
it's a totally different firefighting model. You've got a street of houses up in the sky, 600 people living there, you know, and that's what we need. So how that's going to be done, I'm interested to know. And we'll work with the LFB, absolutely, with the urban firefighting course. And again, it's funding. We need funding. The LFB need funding for this. And I don't know where it's going to come from. I believe it should come from central government. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we put that straight to Jonathan then? Is that part of your urban
It absolutely is. So it's part of the conversations we're having in terms of what the next phase of the Babcock contract looks like, in terms of what our realistic offer as for our frontline firefighters is concerned. Because yes, we've got a baseline provision at the moment, but the nature of the built environment that we know that particularly our firefighters and officers confront on a day-to-day basis means, you know, we need an even more sophisticated offer to our staff. That's the very least we can do. As Gareth alluded to, we have had the ability to use disused high-rise buildings at the moment, so we're currently putting through firefighters and officers a programme at Barking, and literally the high-rise building that's there is next door to Barking Fire Station. You know, I'm very keen to see what we can do to improve our training offer on our estate, but we've also opened up conversations with colleagues at the Fire Service College, with some of our home counties services who have got, just simply because of space and less restrictions in terms of height and in terms of being able to use carbonaceous burns, for example, that we can actually access their training facilities. But this needs to be programmed properly, it needs to be planned properly, and that's the conversation we're having at the moment, because we're all in absolute agreement that we want to offer the most realistic training environment for our staff, knowing what we know about the risk environment that our crews are exposed to on a day-to-day basis. Yes, we're going to have to work that through in terms of what the funding looks like, but if you're looking at, you know, one of the huge priorities that sits on my shoulders, and I know the Commissioner shares this ambition, and it will actually improve a lot of the areas around culture, because it's investing in the professionalism of firefighting, and actually investing properly in terms of the training that's available to firefighters. Actually, that has a knock-on impact in terms of how people view themselves, how they view the profession. So as far as priorities as an organisation concerned, opening up an even more realistic training offer is something that we're all going to work collaboratively together to drive that forward, and will be something that I'll be happy to report back to this committee in terms of progress.
That would be helpful. And do you have an estimate of the timescales of that?
Well, I'm keen to start looking at what we can do this year. So we're looking at a pilot in the southeast area of London around using our current estate and then seeing what we can do in partnership with Babcock instructors and our teams that are already here. We're looking at how we can use things like positive pressure ventilation fans and water misting technology. And that's something that will go live next month, as far as we've got a small specialist team called the RRT who are going to be able to deploy fans and Cobra high-pressure water misting technology onto the front line from the 1st of June. That's a capability outside of some of our specialist counter-terror teams we've not been able to bring to bear in the built environment, so that's going to happen from the 1st of June. My bigger aim and ambition is around what that looks like on the front line. So I want to see positive pressure ventilation fans on every frontline pump. I want to see high pressure water misting technology available on every pump. And we've got the processes in place to make that happen. But the equipment is just one part of it. You then have to align that up with what the training offer looks like. And that will improve significantly our fire behaviour knowledge. As I say, it will make us more professional, more effective, and critically safer on the incident ground. Now, this, as I say, this is something that's a key priority. I want to see movement this year. I think we will be able to access some of the facilities both at the college and some of else of what Babcock have to offer as well, other than the current training provision, predominantly at Beckton and Park Royal and Harrow. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we're going to have a key priority going forward, because there is no bigger concern for us in terms of the safety of our frontline crews, and the way that you help mitigate that is through quality, effective, realistic training.
Thank you. Then my final question in this section, again, is for yourself, Jonathan, and Gareth, is that the culture review identified a lack of consistency, particularly with regards to in-house training, and I think perhaps how that aligned with Babcock training as well, and how those two were aligned. So can you give us an assurance as to how your organisational learning and training model will be consistent and will also be appropriately coordinated?
Well, interestingly enough, I think the answer to that question is probably in the second part of what you've partly of what you've just said as well. So we recognise that there has been some lack of consistency across the board. It's where the strategy that's coming forward is critical to that, and particularly the organisational learning model, which takes that holistic approach across the entire organisation. You know, Keeley's team has been completely reconstructed in terms of what that looks like. So actually she and her team have oversight of training across the board, including the training that's delivered by Babcock. The vast majority of the training, of course, that our firefighters receive, which is on a fire station on a day-to-day basis through DAMOP, so the development and maintenance of operational professionalism. Easy to say. But that captures the core competencies that we expect to see on a day-to-day basis, you know, managed by local teams on fire stations, supervised by supervisory managers. So the fact that the training department has now been reconstituted and has that oversight of training across the whole of the organisation through the new strategy gives us that real fighting chance to have that consistency across the board, and working, you know, much closer than we've ever done before with colleagues in Babcock to make sure we have that consistency, and there's that one team approach, and you don't have a differential between what's offered by London Fire Brigade, what's offered by Babcock. And I think if we continue to do that through the strategy, that's going to put us in a much stronger position.
Thank you. Gareth, did you have anything?
Yeah, thanks. I think for us, we believe the contract is too tight. I mean, we're 12 years into a contract. There's so many constraints on it for London Fire Brigade that what they can and can't do. It's just bordering ridiculous, to be honest. I believe it was rushed through at the time by the mayor and Brian Coleman at the time, which was absolutely madness, to be honest, in my opinion, and the FBU's opinion. I think we need to work with the LFB and Babcock to review the contract so there's flexibility in there, and to change it to make everything equal across the board. And if the LFB wish to do certain courses or certain training, then they should be able to do that, and it should be the same across the board. But at the moment, it's just so constrained, it's madness.
Thank you. I think that was well rehearsed at the time, and a lot of us agreed with you at the time. Can I just ask, because this is a really important one, this is for Keeley, and please feel free to add what you were indicating you wanted to add. But one of the things that the Culture Review said was that, particularly with your black and minority ethnic staff, that one of the reasons they thought they were leaving was that they disproportionately felt that the training did not meet their needs. Have you taken that on board, and what actions have you taken to deal with that?
Yes, I'll address that first, if I may. Yeah, first and foremost, obviously that's built into our leadership programmes. So it'd be fair to say that they needed their voice heard with some of their experiences. And I think that's what our leadership and EDI training has subsequently tried to achieve in bringing mixed staff groups together in order to challenge assumptions and bias, but also to educate staff across the board as to individual needs and difference across the organisation with those particular groups. I think they, felt isolated in some instances, that subsequently then they were pushing through some of their voice through to the equality support groups, but actually there was only one section of the organisation that was taking their needs and their sort of lived experience through to actually report it through to the organisation. We needed to embed that in some way and actually bring them into some of those training aspects and have them input into those training aspects as well, which is what we've done. So I'm pretty much confident that those leadership offerings start to address that. We still have some way to go, but subsequently then, hopefully that will start to address their needs in a little more of an aspect, and actually gets our staff to understand, specifics around difference and start to open up opportunity for staff across the board. I think that was, one of the aspects as well, that we don't have that opportunity actually, blanket across the board given out to all staff groups. And I think, we're starting to sort of challenge that now to make sure that their needs are met, plus they have opportunity to promotional aspects and also to be able to feed into various projects, etc.
Thank you. And did you want to comment on?
The other point was around consistency, and it was just to touch on the fact of looking national as well. So one of the things we're doing is making sure that all of our training offering going forward and the adoption of national operational guidance is also built into there as well. I think that's quite an important aspect and actually helps us to simplify some aspects of our DAMOP training, but subsequently then is going to sort of shape our training offer for the future as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you. If I can just continue on this bit just a bit. Gareth, if I can go back to this question, that the culture review states most trainees leave training without even observing or using some primary operational equipment, and then they do cite that firefighter who said he had not a hotware before being deployed. That is very concerning. Do you recognise that other people don't get that training, or do you think that this is incorrect?
I wouldn't say it's incorrect. I don't recognise that at all. So I go and visit the trainees, or other FBU reps. We go and visit the trainees either at Barking or Plaistow, we used to, or Park Royal. I'm not aware of trainees not having BA training at all. That's not come to across my desk.
And I've never heard of that before. I'm very disappointed, therefore, that went in this review, because it makes it look like you're not training officers properly at all. So I think that should be questioned. When things go in and they're not right, it's not fair to the brigade that is even there. And the only other comment I would make on this is I am pleased that we're looking at culture and all the rest of it, but I would say that high-rise training is vital for safety. So I'm very pleased that we're doing culture and well-being and everything else, but I have to say the well-being of a firefighter, if they're sent to the top of a very high-rise, to me would be right up there with one of the most important things that should go. Right, going on to my question, training as a watch. You've touched on that already, so I won't go ask those questions again. But the only thing that bothers me is if you've got a watch with somebody who's vulnerable within that watch, which is what has been happening, and we've seen that tragically. Is it easier now for a firefighter, if they're unhappy in a watch, to get themselves removed from that watch? Because it's bad enough that they're living within the unit, which is what our firefighters do within these watches. But if they're then also doing all their training as well, it could probably make the situation worse. So can you absolutely assure me that if somebody is unhappy on a watch, they're given a transfer, Jonathan?
No, I think you make a very fair point, Assembly Member Hall. So that was one of the reasons we brought in the independent complaints line that actually gives that security for people that outside of either the line management chain or the structure of the watch itself, to be able to make a complaint that comes through completely independently, and then obviously we can act on it to make sure that people are given the support that they need. It's also where the training offer is critical around how do we create that inclusive culture within watches or in control or in other departments within the organisation that means people can actually raise issues and feel comfortable to be able to do so. You know, that's the culture that we need to get to. But we're not pretending at the moment that we've completed that journey yet, and you probably never do complete it, and it's something we have to keep coming back to. So there are processes and systems in place, which means people can raise complaints quickly, effectively, and with the security that it's anonymous and it comes through to us, and then we can do something about it. The way that we will really resolve it is to make sure that we're creating the environment at work that people feel comfortable and they feel part of that watch. And everyone is able to, you know, as the phrase goes, bring themselves to work and feel comfortable. That's critical. We've overhauled our transfer policy to make sure, and you know, this was as a direct consequence of the tragic death of Jaden Francois Resprit in terms of the numbers of transfer requests that he had made. So that transfer process is now in place. Our central operations team report directly into the Assistant Commissioner for Fire Stations, who oversee all of those movements. So we get to see, and it goes back to the point I was talking about around the data and the people dashboard that we've now got available. So where you've got a particular fire station where there'll be high transfer requests, we can see that now very, very quickly and easily, and we can actually ask the questions and understand why those transfer requests are in, some of which will be completely legitimate because people move and they want a different location, some of which quite clearly will be as a result of unhappiness in the workplace, and we've now got that data available. So we're in a much stronger position now, just to give you the reassurance, Assembly Member Hall, that we are in a better position, but it's also one of these things that we're constantly restless about, to make sure that we keep prodding it and understand that people feel comfortable and safe at work, which is critical.
And have you broken up any watches?
So there has been movement of individual firefighters, and that will mean that watches have actually been broken up as a result of those moves. There's not been wholesale changes of watches, and because there's a lot of good things that come from a tight-knit group that operate together and feel comfortable. But where issues are arising, and again this is where the data comes in, we would absolutely take action, and if that means moving people within a watch, then we will be able to do that. And as I say, the new transfer policy makes that easier to do than it has ever been before, but it's something we have to keep a constant eye on.
You're sounding like it's something you'll do in the future. Is it something you're doing now?
Well, it will only be, so at the moment we've not had to take a decision in the immediacy to actually break up a watch in its entirety, but actually if we got to a position where actually that looked like that was the right thing to do for a whole host of reasons, we wouldn't hesitate in doing it, but we always have to make sure that we're doing it for the right reasons and that we understand why there's a particular problem on a watch. And now we've got the data and the understanding in a much better position than we've ever had done before. And it means working very closely with colleagues in the Fire Brigades Union. Actually, if there are issues that are being picked up, that we work very closely together to see what we can do to change the environment that we're in. But it's where the leadership is critical here. The leadership at leading firefighter, sub-officer, station officer level is how we're actually going to create the environment at work that everybody, regardless of what watch they're on, regardless of what station they're on, feels comfortable and secure. And we've now got the systems in place that where that's not happening, people can report it in a way that they haven't been able to do before, but we just have to keep coming back to it.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Rogers.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's probably a question for Keeley. In LFB's plan to reduce pre-arranged overtime, it states that in order to meet targets of firefighter training, in-house training is being developed. So could you just let us know what progress is being made on this and how many additional places you anticipate providing, please?
Yes, of course. So there are probably two elements that we are moving forward with in the immediate aspect. So first of all, the firefighter development interface team. So subsequently, we are working alongside Babcock with regards to the aspect that John mentioned earlier about the one team approach. We're developing that team. We anticipate to grow that team, although the resourcing for that, the resourcing model for that is being worked on at the moment. And obviously we can come back and write to you and give you that detail as we move forward. That team are going to be supporting the FFD development programme and subsequently looking at it from end to end. So that looks at it right from the outreach concept right through to all of their training and as it is at the moment, the 11-week training, and we're exploring how we can enhance that by interjecting the FFD interface team into that as well to support. But subsequently then when they land on station, so we're looking at all three elements as well, because of course the apprenticeship programme doesn't end there. They continue that when they go onto station as well, right up until their endpoint assessment. And what we're looking at with that team is to subsequently look at not only the welfare support to them, but actually the development support for each individual FFD, and subsequently then looking at the QA process as well. So going in there as well, working alongside Babcock, but quality assuring aspects of that training programme as well. They do form some of the training aspects themselves, so we're looking at enhancing that team, not only giving them training within that quality assurance, but also getting them fit to train requirements. And subsequently then what we do is we're enhancing that FFD programme by giving a 2 weeks before the 11-week start. That has allowed us to take away some of that online pre-learning that previously firefighter trainees were doing, which was very, very difficult, and actually we had no way of monitoring different learning outcomes and different learning needs. So we've done that in face-to-face training now, and that's what the FFD interface team actually do. We've got a huge volume coming through, obviously, with upping that volume between the year 2023-24 in order to meet the average vacancy margin. With that team is going to become ever more important, hence the need for growth in that area. The other area that is moving forward is the incident command training team, and subsequently then they are based at Merton at the moment. So we're looking at different aspects about how they can be utilised. And also in conjunction with Babcock around some of the localised training. We've got a working group that's about to be established to actually look at that in a little bit more detail. One of the things we're doing is potentially looking at level 1 and 2 revalidation, and subsequently looking at that being pushed out into local areas. Through that, we'll explore how the incident command training team, the in-house team, can actually support that going forward. But they are two aspects that are currently in play at the moment. We do then, on top of that, moving forwards, need to look at in-house provision overall. So subsequently looking at our own internal resilience. There are many skills across the board within the organisation that we don't tap into. Subsequently then we have a very highly skilled team that work up at the Fire Service College that are trained within very detailed breathing apparatus training. And they deliver that specialist training, obviously, to police and military colleagues. Subsequently, then, we are looking to tap into that as well, so how we can utilise that, not only for an in-house option, but also to supplement and work alongside Babcock in the future to meet what are potential pinch points throughout the year in being able to enhance and make sure that our FFDs get the required breathing apparatus training and some of the risk critical elements, but also support key corporate projects such as the new breathing apparatus set rollout as well as we go forward in this coming year.
Thank you. That was a comprehensive answer. Thank you very much for that. I mean, you mentioned a number of times you're working with Babcock. So just to check, how are you ensuring that the in-house training and the Babcock training is aligned and that the correct skills are being delivered?
Yeah, sure. So we're looking at the sort of second half of the contract now. So we've recognised that actually we need to get a project team together to look at what the offer looks like for the remainder of the contract. With that, we'll start to have a detailed look at some of the core competency areas, and subsequently then look at volume that's coming through in order to meet our baseline skills requirements, close our skills gap, but more importantly then supplement and make sure that we've got standardisation across the board. John mentioned earlier that what we don't want is a two-tier system. So subsequently, we need to make sure that that's mapped across, and actually we are working, within the realms of our LFB standards, but also national standards as well when it comes to national operational guidance as well. There will be some enhanced training, and obviously then we need to really focus, particularly in our ability of our staff. They may have the skill in order to train, but we need to make sure that they have picked up elements such as AET training and also fit to train requirements themselves, so that we can take that out to our staff and it meets a standardisation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Assemblymember Bailey, who's going to take us on to driver training.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm just this question to Keeley as well. In the LFB's training plan for 22-23, it includes additional driver training as a major part of its changes from Babcock. What would the additional cost of this be over 3 years?
Yeah, so we're scoping the driver training out at the moment. So from a point of view of revalidation of our drivers, that is in a very good place. So we are 99% complete with that, and we hope to be 100% by the end of June. When it comes to the gap that we need in order for drivers going forwards, subsequently we're picking that up in a new 3-year rolling training plan that my team have developed, and that will start to look at closing the gap of the driver requirements, but also start to explore picking up the changes in legislation around Section 19 as well. So we have a working group in progress at the moment to not only close those skills gap, look forward for the next 3 years, but also look at the constraints around that new legislation coming in. We don't have the exact figures for those costings at the moment, but we can write back to you and let you know those as soon as possible.
Can you give us a time frame on when you can come back on that?
Probably, I would say, within the next month.
Okay, thank you. My other question is, would the pension remedy loss of staff, do you have enough staff to cover those shortages over the next 3 years? Because that would suggest you're going to lose quite an experienced set of staff. Many of them may be drivers. How are you going to fill that gap?
Yeah, sure. So this is an aspect, linked to our overarching establishment that we scrutinise quite regularly within an internal meeting known as the Establishment Board, which Jonathan chairs. We look at overarching establishment, but also looking at the throughput with regards to promotions and also the skill set as well. So we've been monitoring the pension remedy for some time now, and subsequently we also look at that in conjunction with our FBU colleagues within the local pension board as well. But it'd be fair to say it's been a sort of moving feast, so to speak. The numbers move all the time. It may be that we may see an impact with regards to the changes and the recent pay offer as well, but those figures are monitored quite closely and quite regularly. What we are doing is subsequently then looking at what we know as the average vacancy margin, which regards to FFD and bringing in new trainees, because obviously they are the firefighters and officers and will pick up the skills of the future, but that takes some time for that throughput to work its way through. In the immediacy, what we're doing through the 3-year training plan is subsequently we've broken that down into 3 parts, and the first part of that is known as closing our skills gap. So that will look at taking a holistic view of all the establishments and then making sure that we've got the right people in the right place, also looking at potential transferees and what they can bring into the organisation as well. But we monitor that quite closely through that board, and we're confident that actually we can sort of, we've got the right people within that meeting to actually make change and obviously keep a close focus on it.
So you're confident in the future you have a plan to cover your gap of drivers. Can I ask some rather basic questions? What attracts people to be drivers? Is it compulsory, or are you still doing it voluntarily?
We've moved through different aspects of this over time, and especially with regards to actually bringing people into the organisation as new firefighters. So we've picked, it's gone from sort of mandatory, then we've subsequently dropped that. So at the moment, it isn't the case that we say to new joiners that they come in and subsequently they have to be a driver straight away. That is constantly reviewed. So it would be fair to say, actually, with a new individual coming in, and actually everything they have to learn at that particular point, it is quite intensive, and actually then to throw the driving aspect on them as well is quite, a difficult aspect also. But these could be, perceived as being the skills of a firefighter, going forward, and we have to closely monitor that so we make sure that we've got that right throughput, for the future. One of the aspects that I've touched on is obviously the transferees. So subsequently, then we can stipulate, based on the numbers, that actually we would try and get the driving skill to come in, and we monitor that quite closely. But subsequently, then it is quite a complex aspect. We can't totally predict what we will have coming in, although we constantly review that to make sure that actually not only do we make sure that people have got the right skills at the right periods and they pick that up as they move through, but actually we can buy that additional skill in as well through transferees, etc.
Jonathan, I understand you want to come in?
Yeah, it was just around your previous point, Assembly Member Bailey, around the pensions remedy and what that could have potentially looked like. So we were planning for all sorts of scenarios, from your worst case Armageddon scenario where we lose a whole chunk of very experienced firefighters in one foul swoop, all the way through to not so much change at all. So Establishment Board is something that I chair, which concentrates on all of these workforce planning issues, whether it's the numbers of drivers that we've got, whether it's the numbers of incident commanders we've got in the right place, whether it's actually the broad average vacancy margin to make sure we've got enough people in the organisation to deliver the service that we expect. And what you've seen with the pension remedy, that's obviously been an ongoing issue for a number of years now, and actually a lot of people who were impacted by that have subsequently retired. So we can say with some confidence now we don't expect to see, a lot of people leave at any one time, but it's something we constantly track at Establishment Board, and that meets monthly. So it's just to give you that confidence that we keep a very close eye on that to see what that looks like. I think actually the pay agreement has been very helpful as well, because actually where a lot of people would have retired, certainly had there been industrial dispute within the fire sector, I think you would have seen many people who could retire. That's obviously, I'm pleased to say, not the case, and so we don't expect to see the sort of Armageddon scenario. We see a lot of people leave at any one moment.
Okay, thank you. Just to another basic question, Keeley. What will you do? Because if we're still volunteering drivers and as I go through my career as a firefighter, I decide if I want to do it or not. How possible is it for you as an organisation to say, actually, we need to make this compulsory? Is that still on the table?
Yes, of course. Yes, it is something that if we need, and we have done previously, so if it's something that is we look at the numbers and actually monitor the workforce planning quite carefully, if we can look ahead and actually say, we can actually take that decision to say, actually, we'll inject that within the recruitment process by other means, or look at our existing staff as well, because, there are some people that, again, going back to having the right people in the right place with the right skills, subsequently there may be some individuals within the organisation already that we would, expect them to pick up that driving skill.
So you're saying this could be for new recruits and current?
It could be for, current. It's one of those things that actually we could take a decision on, but we wouldn't necessarily go back to say, firefighters within the organisation that, now you will all be drivers. We would have to take that decision quite carefully, because we have to take all the other skills into consideration as well. But subsequently, there are people that, maybe have the driving skill, and for whatever reason, they may not be performing that role at the moment. But we can look at those aspects as well. But of course, we could take the decision to say from this point, any new intake, these would be the requirements going forward.
Just quick, Gareth, how do you think your members would react to that decision?
So historically, FF9 in the firefighter role map is to drive and redeploy appliances. I think the biggest issue that's been coming to me across my desk is the capacity issue. There's firefighters on stations across the board. I had an inquiry from Barking Fire Station only last week. There's firefighters there that want to do driving courses. They can't get on the courses. They're waiting a considerable amount of time to get on the courses. And it's something that we've spoken to the brigade about on numerous occasions, about how the capacity is increased. So there are firefighters on stations that have been serving for some time that will and want to volunteer to do driving, but it's taking some time to get through.
Okay, maybe Jonathan can hear that and do something about it. I think that's back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Jonathan, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just to come on the very fair challenge that Gareth raises. So it's part of the reason why Keeley's team have pulled together a three-sectional, 3-year plan. So it comes in stages. So the first stage is to address some of those workforce planning issues, particularly around driving, to increase the capacity that Babcock is able to offer, so that actually where we do have firefighters who want to drive and have got the capability to drive, the course is available. It's very much in the planning. We have to make sure that we're constant. And actually, to be fair to Babcock, giving them the ask as us as the customer to make sure that they understand what our needs and wants are, and then we plan accordingly. So that's why the training plan now is much better than it's ever been before, because it's in 3 phases. Focus on our gaps around our critical skills, driving being one of them, then the BAU, and then where I think we're going to get into a much stronger position is that it's over a 3-year period as opposed to the annual training plan, which is where we've been in the past. Because actually a lot of this we can predict. We know we need drivers, we know we need people to wear BA, we know we need incident commanders. We can plan that in. It actually gives Babcock a fighting chance to make sure that they've got the capacity to meet our training needs.
Thank you so much. If it's very quick.
It's just a comment. I remember the absolute chaos that we had. I think it was about 10 years ago when we just didn't have the drivers. So we had to make it compulsory. We had people driving that were having accidents left, right and centre. And it's because it was incorrect planning. So I do hope we hurry up on those courses, because we never want to go back to the situation it was then.
That's dreadful. Assemblymember McCartney, and then I'll...
Thank you. And again, it's on the theme of workforce planning, but the Fire Order and Building Safety Act puts further requirements on you, which I'm assuming will need to further training that's required. And I note that your fire safety inspecting officers have quite a high turnover. And so I'm just wondering, what are you doing to address that training need? And is that a training need you're going to deliver in-house or with Babcock, and does that necessitate then a change to contracts? I don't know who wants to.
Yes, this is one of the aspects of my department now having a holistic view of the additional training that goes on across the organisation, and some of that is specialist training as well. The fire safety departments have been really proactive in looking at their recruitment recently, but obviously with that, coupled with that, is the detailed training that is associated with that. We do not do that through the Babcock contracts. That is done outside of that contract. And obviously there is additional funding that has been given to that particular piece. What officers within that department need to do now is obviously then, triangulate that and actually show how the funding is then subsequently being used accordingly. And we're working through those plans at the moment. I don't have the detail with me today, but that is an ongoing piece that's being mapped out at the moment.
Thank you.
Jonathan.
Yeah, it was just to reflect on that point, actually. So what that talks to is some of the challenges that we face within the competitive market within London. So the skills that a lot of our fire safety inspecting officers have are of huge value to the private sector for obvious reasons, and we have to compete in that market. And it's not just within fire safety, it's across our other professional departments, whether it's in general counsel or procurement, property, that we're in a very, very competitive employment market at the moment. And obviously as a public sector organisation, we are within limits in terms of what we can offer as far as pay and recognition is concerned. But I know colleagues in fire safety in particular are working up quite innovative ways in how we can use our workforce across the board in terms of the capability that sits on fire stations to plug any potential gaps that we may have as a result of just operating in a very, very competitive market. But it's an issue across all of our professions within the brigade, and I know other public sector organisations face the same challenge.
Yeah, thanks.
Now on to Assemblymember Polanski, who's going to ask more questions on the contract.
Thank you, Anne. Good morning, all. Joanna, if I can begin with you. So on the training contract, it's received a lot of criticism in recent reports. What would be your response, I guess, as a high-level question to those criticisms?
Thank you. So the contract's been in place for 12 years now. I think it predates everybody around this table. what I would say is we are fully committed to working with the LFB to achieve the learning outcomes that they're looking for. So if that means we need to look at what's in the contract, if that means that we need to make changes in order to ensure that the realism that Jonathan talked about earlier and that the training that we're focusing on is fit for purpose, then we'll absolutely do that.
And Gareth said earlier that from his point of view, and also he said from the union's point of view, it's far too rigid. There's no flexibility in it. What would be your response to that?
So I don't fully accept that. I think there is flexibility within the contract. I think what I'm really keen to do is work collaboratively with the LFB to look at what is it we're trying to achieve in the second half of the contract. Is that allowed within the current commercial constraints that's there? And then if not, we can absolutely look at what we need to do. But there is some flexibility in the contract, but as always, it's complex. It's a complex contract.
And within those commercial constraints, and I would obviously argue that the government should make sure those commercial constraints aren't there, but they are. So how would you ensure that there would be sufficient quality and it would meet the professional standards required for operating LFB staff?
Yeah, so we've got a rigorous quality assurance process that's already in place within the contract. That's everything from the strategy that we agree in collaboration with the customer. It's then looking at the policy and does it meet ISO 9001 standards. We then have regular sort of feedback loops and quality assurance that sits within that. So there is a quality assurance framework. Again, if we want to look at that in light of feedback or learning, we absolutely can. But there is a fully thought through quality assurance process that we report on a regular basis.
And are you confident it's providing value for money for LFB?
I believe it's delivering value for money.
Jonathan, if I can turn to you. We've spoken a lot on this committee about the changing risks to London, and you talked about urban firefighting as being the kind of new vision for London. We know last year that in terms of call-outs from the wildfires, the London Fire Brigade had one of its worst days or busiest days since World War II, and we saw the fires at Wennington as well. In terms of the training that the London Fire Brigade uses, how is this changing to be able to deal with wildfires and flooding?
Yeah, so quite understandably, this has been a key issue for us to reflect on from the experiences that we had last summer. So what I'm really pleased to report is that training on wildfire is now started. So there's training packages being rolled out to all frontline firefighters now. That began at the beginning of this month in preparation for what we expect is going to be another busy season. And that's a baseline level of training for all of our frontline staff. We've then got a level above that, where we've got tactical advisors being trained at the moment who reflect on the National Fire Chief Council syllabus around what wildfire tactical advisors look like. And then we've got another 30 officers drawn across our officer cadre at station commander and group commander level who take that a stage further. And then finally, we're going to have 4 nationally recognised NFCC wildfire tactical advisors, which is the highest capability. At the moment, we haven't got any. So we're going to have 4. So we're going to have all of those levels of capability across the organisation in preparation for what we expect is going to be a busy summer again. This is drawn on experience that other fire services have in the country, and I've spoken at this committee before in terms of work we've done with Northumberland Fire and Rescue Service, who have a particular expertise around wildfire. We've also drawn upon experiences in Europe to make sure that what our offer looks like going forward reflects the risks that we've got. And just on the point around the contract, this is one of the key opportunities for me, knowing that what we now know about the risk that firefighters in 21st century London face going forward, and the rural-urban interface, which we know is a particular challenge when it comes, well, both wildfire and flooding actually, is something that we want to embed in the training offer in the second half of the contract going forward. But in terms of the immediacy around the challenge that we face this summer, I'm pleased to report that we are now we will be in a much better position before the wildfire season starts this year because of the training that's being rolled out as we speak.
And I'm not sure if this is a follow-up question to you, or maybe Joanna might want to take it, but I could see here that we've invested over £13 million, or Babcock has, in world-class training centres. Considering the changing fire risk and the changing risks that there are to the fire brigade, are those training centres still fit for purpose, or actually does climate risk require a different kind of training centre?
I think the answer to that is probably yes, in terms of if you look at the challenge, particularly where the rural meets the urban, that actually we need to be quite imaginative in terms of what that training capability looks like. I mean, there's lots you can do without the need for a particular venue that is able to map out what wildfire looks like. You know, the use of modern technology now really is able to give you a very good sense of where you think your particular pinch points are going to be, where you know, without wishing to the pun, the hot spots are going to be when it gets to where it's going to start. You're able to use that technology to do that. But for me, I'm a huge advocate, as I'm sure everyone is on this panel in the committee, around practical physical training about what does that actually look like on the ground, so that firefighters have got that preparation. And I think that is something we need to reflect on in terms of, particularly around wildfire and flooding provision, which is not easy to replicate in a real fire training environment, which is where I think areas around virtual reality actually can really play a role. So we had a presentation actually that was through Babcock around what virtual reality can actually give us, because that will able to replicate a number of scenarios that are very, very difficult to recreate a physical environment. But my preference is always that we try and find a physical venue and put people through physical training, because that's the most realistic that you could expect to see.
That makes sense. And just outside this chamber today, the Thames Estuary are updating their 2100 plan. What work are you doing with the Environment Agency to share training practices around flooding?
So we do a lot of work with the Environment Agency to make sure that, through alerting, to make sure that the posture of the brigade is where it needs to be. If we've got alerts coming through around particular pinch points around what the weather is looking like, that the brigade is stood up and ready. We have significant capability on the front line through the experiences that we've had over particularly over the course of the last 3 to 4 years. You know, we have boat provision, we have pumping provision, we have dams in place. We've supplemented our operational support units at the moment to make sure that we've got additional capability that sadly, when we flood again, we have got all the equipment and all the training required to be able to deliver that service. But prevention, as always, is better than cure, making sure people are prepared. It sits as one of the key elements within the local borough risk management plans around community preparedness. And that means the fire service working very closely with partner agencies and the public to make sure that people are prepared. You know, flooding, one of the best things people can do is not concrete up their front drive, for example. You know, it's things like that we need to work very closely with partners and with the public to make sure we're prepared, but then we've got the response arrangements in place to deal with these incidents as and when they occur.
Yeah, absolutely. While this committee's been going on, the BBC are reporting scientists are saying that we look like we're going to breach 1.5 degrees warming in the next few years. And so it's absolutely vital, as well as resilience, that we're also curbing our emissions. I think that's well rehearsed. You talked about sending firefighters to Europe to sometimes consider other kind of climate crises. How is that training then disseminated? Because presumably if a couple of firefighters go, we lend those firefighters to go learn how to tackle wildfires or flooding in other countries. What's done with that information when they then come back?
Well, and interesting, the NFCC wildfire training package is a direct result of London firefighters being engaged internationally. So we worked with the National Fire Chiefs Council and the University of Newcastle, given the experience that, because we've got a very small R&D function now within the brigade, because that was one of the criticisms that actually came out post-Grenfell, is as an organisation where we're really looking outwardly, both in terms of National Fire and Rescue Services who've got expertise in this space and internationally. And the answer to that is absolutely yes. And the training package which is being rolled out to frontline firefighters is a direct result of the learning that we've, particularly with firefighters in France and Spain and Greece, and to a lesser extent Australia and their experiences, that we've been able to bring back, and not only for the benefit of London Fire Brigade, but for the fire sector nationally, which is probably something we wouldn't have done 4 or 5 years ago. Thank
you. Gareth, if I can talk to you about training, comparing the London Fire Brigade to other fire brigades around the UK, are fire officers being offered the same quality of training and provision?
So there's, in regard to that, it's the urban environment in London is different. High-rise buildings, high-rise fires, basements, sub-basement fires. So there is a different aspect to that sort of training within London. But I think London firefighters are now getting the additional wildfire training and how that reacts with the urban environment. But there's a few points that I wanted to raise that's been said, if that's okay. So July the 19th last year, there were 39 pumping appliances unavailable on that day. So I'd like some sort of commitment from the LFB that won't happen again when 41 London homes were lost, and we need all the appliances on the run. The Babcock contract, it states there should be 4 training venues. We've still only got 2. There's no training venues in South London, so I don't think they have actually fulfilled their contract in that regard. That then causes firefighters from South London having to travel at great expense and environmental issues from South London to Beckton or Park Royal. You know, we're 12 years down the line and that still hasn't been done. We've got lightweight portable pumps, which are a smaller pump that were carried on frontline appliances that we could carry off, and we would put them into canals, rivers, and swimming pools, etc., and we could lift that water and then use that across fields and open spaces and so on and so forth. They're not on frontline fire appliances anymore because there's not room for them at the moment. They're available on operational support units across the brigade, but we believe they must be put back on frontline fire appliances for water relay, for issues where you can't get an urban fire appliance to somewhere where there's water. So on the outer parts of London, there are less hydrants and they're further apart, so we need to use open water sources, and these pieces of equipment are essential, I would say. So that's where I am on the questions that you've raised. Thanks.
Thank you, Gareth. Deputy Commissioner, just turning back to you. So if we take the 39 appliances not on the run, is this the skills gap that we're coming back to, or do you know specifically why those weren't?
Yes, so in terms of that particular day, that was related to the skills gaps and the workforce planning that and those issues that we've discussed before. What I can say is that obviously there was a major incident review that was carried out as a result of our experiences from not just the 19th of July but throughout the summer, and we have a much better planning process in place now. So we have a 7-day forecasting meeting with senior officers within the London Fire Brigade to make sure that where we're getting intelligence, that we posture the organisation appropriately. And it's not just in terms of any weather events. You know, if you take the coronation, for example, that we've just recently had, it was making sure that we accrued everything in the most effective and efficient way possible, that we had maximum resource available, and that's planned over a 7-day period. So it means where we're anticipating particular pinch points, we can resource accordingly. Now, the answer to the problem, and it's elements that we've touched on, is that we still need to address our average vacancy margin. In very simplistic terms, that means bringing more people into the organisation. It means maximising the Babcock contract, as Keeley's already alluded to, what additional provision we can provide to bring more people into the organisation, because actually what we're all agreed on is we want to accrue the maximum number of appliances with the maximum number of people with the right skills in the right place at the right time. We're all in glorious agreement on that. We've just got to make sure that we work it through in the most efficient and effective way possible. But I'm pleased to say that we are in a much stronger position going into the wildfire season now than we were last year, as a direct result of a lot of the lessons that we've learned, including making sure that we posture the organisation appropriately once we start to get intelligence around what a particular scenario may look like, whether it's weather related or whether it's a significant event, or if the terror threat rises, that we posture the organisation accordingly. So we're in a much stronger position now than we were then, but it's something, again, that we have to keep coming back to and reflecting on. But the way that we're structured now in terms of our strategic operational planning is much better as a result of the wildfire experience we had last year.
Now, you monitor training delivery by KPI compliance. Are there any other criteria that you monitor training delivery by?
So one of the key elements that sits within the new strategy going forward is around assurance, and making sure the assurance against the training that is being delivered matches our expectations in terms of the quality of the training materials used, the impact that it's having on our staff. So just in terms of the Babcock contract, there's obviously a very clear set of 17 KPIs that are specifically around what the Babcock contract looks like. The assurance framework that Keeley's team have been working on and will be going live, I think it's at the end of this month, isn't it, Keeley? I think that goes live at the end of this month, is to answer exactly that question, to make sure that we are assured that the training that's right across the organisation, not just that training that's delivered through the Babcock contract, but what happens in control, what happens in fire safety, what happens in other parts of the organisation, is meeting our expectations. And the assurance element to that is critical, which is where the strategy is going to help take us forward to give everyone around this table and Londoners, most importantly, the assurance that the training being delivered to all staff within London Fire Brigade is of the quality that we would expect.
Thank you. I don't know if you wanted to come in, Keeley.
Yeah, thank you. In addition to that, we work alongside Babcock, so we've looked and reviewed 2 internal meetings, one of them being the contract performance meeting. Subsequently, we've got a training performance element within my department, and that works alongside Babcock to look at those KPIs, as you've mentioned, plus to make sure that we're getting value for money and the training offer that comes forward is cost effective. In addition to that, outside of the KPIs, we look at non-provision deductions as well. So subsequently then, obviously that carries an element of financial penalty if those courses do not come to fruition. And we work closely with Babcock, not only to implement that process to make sure that we achieve value for money, but also to work alongside them to overcome some of the issues so it's not repeated.
Thank you. Can I ask on the financial penalties that the Fire Brigade often talk about transparency, and that's obviously a good step. But with the financial penalties, you've stopped publishing them, and in fact the historical record, as I understand, has also disappeared. What's going on there?
I believe there was a decision to stop publishing those. I don't think for any particular reason. I just think it was part of that governance process that potentially wasn't picked up. We certainly, can look at that and subsequently write to the committee if aspects of those, those non-provisions and KPIs, to disclose those to you. But we'll look at that and come back to you if I may.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner.
Yes, I don't think there's any reason why we can't do that in terms of the quarterly report that was historically published. I see no reason why we can't do that, as you say, in the interests of transparency, and obviously for this committee to hold us to appropriate account. I don't see any issue there.
Thanks for the commitment.
I know Gareth also wants to come in.
Sorry. Thank you, Gareth.
Yeah, I'm going to repeat myself again. It's funding. London Fire Brigade needs to change. A lot of different training needs to be done. A lot of different things have happened over the years, and they need additional funding to train firefighters to keep them safe. It's a safety issue. London firefighters, we need to get the establishment up. We need to have them trained to the right level so that they look after each other and look after the people that live in London and Londoners and visitors alike. And it's funding.
I think you're right. It's a question of political priorities, and you'd hope that protecting those who protect us would be a political priority. But anyway, Chair, I'll get off my soapbox.
I quite like that soapbox. Okay, thank you. Assemblymember Cooper.
Thanks. I wonder if either Jonathan or Joanna could set out for us what percentage of the Babcock training is delivered in person and what percentage is delivered online.
I don't think unless Joe has the actual percentages in terms of what it looks like from a computer-based training package and online package versus what's done physically. I think what I would say though is that all of our online offer, whether it's computer-based training or anything else, is designed to supplement physical training. And as in response to the answer to the question before, clearly with a very practical profession that firefighting is actually through practical physical training delivers the best result. But there is a real place for technical training, for what can be done online. As I was saying before, there's definitely an opportunity around virtual reality. If you look at some of the high-profile training that we've run sort of in the post-Grenfell world around high-rise provision, fire survival guidance, mass evacuation, what you had there is a connection between very technical knowledge that firefighters and control officers needed to know and understand, but that supplements what you then do practically. So the practical training, 90% of our staff have been through a high-rise exercise, 40 exercises run this year, but that's on top of the computer-based training that everyone had received prior to that to make sure that the theory is then enacted on the front lines. I'm afraid I can't give you a particular percentage in terms of what's done online versus what's done practically, but they don't sit as two separate things. They absolutely work together.
I mean, maybe that's something that you would be able to supply to us afterwards. I mean, obviously, I think we fully appreciate, and also we've had the opportunity to go and see some of the training in action, which was fantastic, although we were very upset that we weren't allowed to fly the drone. Just saying. Obviously, it was worth a lot of money, so that was probably a very good call on the part of the officers who wouldn't let us do that. But obviously, there are some courses that might be particularly susceptible susceptible to online. For example, computer safety on being online and being safe with the use of your various devices. So courses like that. I mean, how do you determine, and this might be one for Joanna, but obviously Jonathan as well, how do you determine which courses might be suitable for delivery online?
Thank you for the question. So ultimately it's looking at what's the learning outcomes that the LFB would like to achieve. And that's a collaborative piece. What's the training need that's been identified? What are the learning outcomes? And then it's a conversation about how best to deliver training to enable those outcomes. As you said, it could be that looking at some kind of e-learning opportunity is the best way of doing that. It could be that it's face-to-face delivery. It could be that it's blended, because obviously individuals also learn in different ways. So actually using e-learning to consolidate learning, not necessarily replace face-to-face delivery, is quite a powerful tool, and it also gives a reference point for the learner at a later point to go back and review. So it's a collaborative exercise, but it's got to be based on what's the outcomes that we're looking to achieve, and therefore based on engagement and recommendation, this is the approach that we would recommend. And that then flows into course length, it flows into, assessment, etc.
And I think that the point you make, Assembly Member Cooper, is absolutely right. So there are particular areas of learning that really do lend themselves to an online offer. So you'll be pleased to know we do offer online around GDPR regulations and data protection, around actually how you interface with your desktop and the technology that's made available, all the way through to cyber security. All of that is done online, because it completely lends itself to that. And as Joe's already alluded to, is what is the training outcome that we're looking to achieve. And the vast majority of the time, certainly from firefighting as a profession, what you have is a blended approach where you need some very technical knowledge and expertise, which lends itself to an online offer, all the way through to actually putting firefighters through very rigorous, real, as we've discussed the importance of that, practical training. And it's a combination of all of those that then gives you the outcome that we're seeking to achieve.
Keeley, did you want to come in as well?
Yes, if I may, just briefly as well, I think it's that evaluation of it once it's been implemented as well. So the reason I say that is looking back to the trainee firefighters as well, where they had the lead-in to their initial training course, 11-week course, and subsequently then all of that was online, through a tablet, and subsequently then they were expected to absorb that, put that into context, and they'd be tested on that when they come into the organisation. We did recognise that that wasn't best for subsequent learning outcomes. Therefore, we changed that to move that to face-to-face.
And so perhaps one for Joanna, but also maybe for Jonathan too. Does the Babcock contract, which we've touched on quite a lot this morning, provide sufficient flexibility and adaptability in the light of the significant changes that are being required of the LFB? And I think it was actually Gareth who ran through a list of all of the different things that are impinging on the service, from Grenfell to the Manchester Arena to the Nazir Afzal report and so on. Do you think there's enough flexibility in the contract to enable you to tailor the offer, Joanna, and to provide the right offer, Jonathan?
Yeah. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, there is flexibility within the contract. I guess it depends on what you mean by flexibility. What we're committed to doing, however, is ensuring that what we deliver for the next 12 years on behalf of the LFB meets the outcomes and the requirements. And if that means that we need to look at what's in the contract, we will look to do that. But there are flexibilities already afforded in there. It might be that we're not using them, or we're not using them to the best effect at the moment. But I think Jonathan made the point earlier, we are absolutely committed to sitting down and working through what's the strategy, what's LFB's strategy for the next X number of years, and how do we ensure that the training that's being delivered meets those requirements.
Yeah, just to reiterate those points, I think there is some flexibility in the current contract, but I think one of the things we're very clear about is that we've probably reached the limit of what that contract can do at the moment, given the nature of the risk that we face going forward. And that's, in fairness to Babcock, that's a shockwave across the whole of the sector, not just because the world back in 2012, when the contract was being set out then, is very different to where we are now. The risk profile that we deal with on a day-to-day basis has significantly shifted. So I think we're all in agreement that actually that's right, that now we've reached the halfway point in the current contract. It's reached its current limit, albeit there is some flex in there. And actually what we need to set out very clearly as the London Fire Brigade is our expectations and our strategy going forward to make sure we are delivering the best possible training that reflects the very real risk that our frontline firefighters and control staff actually will expect to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And I think that, for me, is a huge opportunity, both for us as LFB and Babcock, actually, as an organisation. And I know Jo's having those conversations with her colleagues in the military that Babcock also have contracts with, to actually, what does the risk profile look like now, and what does that training offer need to look like? And the urban firefighting that I was referencing before is genuinely a real opportunity to reset us as an organisation around what that looks like going forward, which means all of our staff and Gareth's members are getting top quality provision which matches the risk that they face.
I'll come back to the point on the journey through the contract, but as you just mentioned, Gareth, in fact, I was just going to say, what is the feeling from the FBU about the contract and the balance between the sort of the hands-on practical and, I mean, I always used to be very resistant personally to online training, but, you know, doing some of the sort of, you know, computer safety training online, DSE, displaced screen equipment, actually also some EDI, the equality, diversity and inclusion training online. I suppose I've had to grit my teeth and just get in there. What's the feeling from members? Do they like the balance the way it is at the moment? Do they have a view?
I think members and the FBU's position is the same. We want trainer-led training. That's what training. We want trainers, people that are training, that are trained to train. So watch officers, that was a recommendation from the Grenfell Tower inquiry, that station officers, sub-officers and leading firefighters now should be trained to train, because they're doing watch-based training, and where our position is that it should be trainer-led training, and those people should be trained to train. So that's where we are with it. I mean, I'd like to ask, is the LFB saying that there's going to be a review of the Babcock contract then? Is it going to be reviewed? Is that what's being said?
Well, that's the point. You've now reflected back into the point that I wanted to pick up really with Jonathan. You're saying the travel through the contract now is about halfway through, so it's a point of review. So there's two questions really. One is, how will you be involving members of staff in the process of thinking about how well it's gone so far, what needs to be tweaked, or even more than a tweak, some fairly substantial changes? You know, how will Gareth and others be involved in that process, as well as having those conversations with Babcock? And a cheeky question, is there a break clause in the Babcock contract?
So just in terms of the first question that you raised, so yes, we're at a sensible juncture in terms of the position of the contract moving forward. That we do have that proper review. As I was mentioning before, there's a programme of transformation around our people services offer, which will also include training. So we're pulling together a project team at the moment to start to map out what the second half of the contract looks like going forward, which addresses all of the risks that we've talked about in this committee.
And does that include FBU reps?
Well, I don't think you would necessarily have an FBU rep as part of the project team, but as far as but they'd be more than welcome to if that was something that they were interested in. Okay. But in terms of the consultation,
he's nodding, by the way.
Then you have a seat, Gareth. You might regret that. But anyway, in terms of the consultation that needs to happen, absolutely, because we're very much of the view that so if we take wildfire as a good example, so if we look at the feedback that we received from frontline staff following the wildfire last year, that's why we're posturing the organisation now as a direct result of that feedback, because actually it's all very well me having a view, but unless something's gone horribly wrong, I'm not going to be the one who's actually putting that wildfire out at the very sharp end. So it's absolutely right that those who are helping to shape what that training offer looks like moving forward, because otherwise, you know, it's not going to deliver what we want it to do, because actually if the end user is not satisfied with the training that they're receiving, then it means they're less safe and they're less effective in terms of the service that they're delivering. I mean, in terms of the contract, I'll probably let Jo come in on this point, but in terms of any break clauses within the contract, of course, all of those exist, but there's cost penalties and a number of other things that come with it. I think the focus for me is about how do we use the second half of that contract to really address a lot of the issues that this committee has raised and we've discussed at length.
Okay, well, let's assume that we're not going to go down the route of using the break clause. I'm going to come back to Joanna, though. You heard very clearly what Gareth was saying about hands-on training being delivered face-to-face by trainers. So a really important question, where do you get your trainers from?
A few different places. So in essence, they have to be sector competent. So there is a requirement for them to come from the sector or the specific discipline that they are then going to be delivering training in.
So previously firefighters, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, ultimately. But I guess if they're delivering specialisms, they also have to have that specialism as well.
Right.
We do have a blended resource model, so it is Babcock trainers, but we also have secondees from the LFB, and we also have LFB employees that also support with the training. So it's a blended delivery model in terms of how we respond to that. So in terms of where do we recruit from, inevitably, because of the sector competence, that drives you to a particular area where you need to go and recruit from. But ultimately, as I said, it is a blended approach. It's not all just direct Babcock employees. There's a blended resource model that we deploy.
And how do you quality assure your trainers?
Yeah, so clearly there is a piece of work that's done before they join to ensure that sector competence is there, and that's in collaboration with the LFB. There is a fit to train element, again, that's done in collaboration with the LFB. All of our individuals then go through a level 3 educational qualification to ensure that they're fit to train. So it's one thing being sector competent, but can you train? So there's an element around making sure that they have that. They have a thorough induction period, and then there is a training program that also happens. So it could be up to 6 months before somebody will then actually be training on their own, when we are comfortable and the LFB are comfortable that those individuals are able to train effectively. Once they're then trained, there's a fitness test as well at the beginning, but there's also a fitness test, there's continuous professional development, there's refresher training to ensure that from a competency perspective that they're still key and aligned, and that competence is being refreshed on a regular basis.
Now, I mentioned EDI earlier on, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. Are they trained so that they've got a good, clear understanding of that? And also, do you make sure that you have a wide range of trainers as well, so that the training is actually being delivered by a team of trainers who themselves are diverse?
I think I mentioned earlier, we have a number of CPDs available to our trainers. Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, mental health and stress awareness are 3 elements that are covered through that. We have over 30 mental health first aiders within our direct pool, but also more broadly in Babcock. That's something that we've invested in. So that's a key part of CPD, and similarly on the back of the culture review, making sure that we are in step with the messaging and the changes that are being effected with AFB. They are replicated in the training environment.
Now, obviously, one thing that has been talked about, both in relation to the fire service and the police service and also some other services, has been vetting processes as people come in. Do you carry out the full extended DBS checks on all your trainers?
So our trainers are DBS checked.
And is that the full check or the smaller ones?
I would need to check that.
If you could come back to me on that,
fine.
And also the point about the balance between the face-to-face training and the online training. Jonathan, are you able to give us a copy of the contract that the brigade has with Babcock? I mean, obviously, with anything particularly commercially sensitive redacted, could we see that?
Yeah, I see no reason at all why we can't do that. No, that's fine.
That would be great. Both the London Fire and Emergency Planning Authority and then the LFB produced reports on training and Babcock. The final LFB training update was published in June 2020. We haven't received training data since then. Is there a reason why we stopped publishing, and is that something that we could perhaps see again?
Yes, I'm afraid I don't know the rationale behind that decision as to why we've not done that. But what I can say is that, you know, absolutely in the interest of transparency and making sure that this committee is cited on what we're doing around training, given how critical it is, we're more than happy to do that. You know, that includes the training plan, you know, the strategy that we're working towards to make sure that you've got that available. So yes, apologies, I don't know why that decision was taken, but I see absolutely no reason at all why we wouldn't want to do that, because as I said before in one of my previous answers, I think the opportunity that exists now to reset around operational training in particular is enormous to address a number of the not only the cultural issues but some of the practical risk-based issues that we face on a day-to-day basis.
It's such a critical area, isn't it? We understand that the LFB Establishment Board monitors the operational skills gap, and the training data is supplied to that forum on a monthly basis. I'm not sure we'd want to see it on a monthly basis, but could we receive that on a quarterly basis, or, you know, annually or something like that, so that we can see how that skills gap is being closed? That would be helpful.
On behest of the Chair, you're more than happy to share that information. As I say, some of it is in very, very granular detail in terms of the reports that come to Establishment Board, but actually what you will be able to track is the trends, you know, the trends around addressing the average vacancy margin, the trends in addressing some of the areas around driving and incident command, which for obvious reasons this committee will have a real interest in. So I think it'll be something we can take away, Chair, and then make sure we give you a version that is actually useful for you to then scrutinise on our progress against all of those areas.
Yes, I think 150 pages of granular detail might be slightly more than the than we're actually looking for, although Susan might still want it, of course. In January, coming to Joanna, in January 2013, Babcock agreed to ALFIPA, the precursor to this committee, publishing monthly performance data on the training contract, including the associated abatement figure. Do you still consent to the performance data being published by the LFB? That's not a problem for you, I hope?
So we've consistently shared that information. There's monthly packs that go to the LFB that outline performance, so that's not stopped. We continue to share it with the LFB.
And so that's something you'd be happy to share with us, Jonathan? Same.
Yes, again, same answer as before. Yeah.
Great, that's fantastic, and that's all of my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Guess we'll be happy to hear we are coming towards the end, so thank you all for your patience so far. I think we've had some really good answers. Assemblymember Palance is going to take us on a training outside the Babcock.
Thank you, and thanks for your transparency on that. We're excited about the granular detail. Moving away from the Babcock contract, how much training provision happens outside of that, and who provides it? I suppose that's to you, Deputy Commissioner.
Yeah, so we've got a number of training interventions that are delivered outside of the constraints of the Babcock contract. So we've got particular, as I was mentioning before, within fire safety. So we've got external providers who deliver training within very specialist fire safety training. Within control, we've got a training team within control that are subject matter experts and obviously deliver the particular training requirements that are needed for the role of a control room officer. So that's all done outside of the Babcock contract. And of course, as I was mentioning before, the bulk of the training that our firefighters receive is actually what's received day to day on station. You know, drilling in the yard with their watch officers, making sure they're going through the DAMOP cycle that sits on a fire station, and then the big bulk training interventions around some of our risk critical areas around breathing apparatus, incident command, driving. That obviously sits within the Babcock contract, but actually the vast majority of the training that a firefighter would experience on a day-to-day basis is delivered at station level through the watch structure that exists, and then we've got specialist training delivered across the whole of the organisation. One of the criticisms that was levelled against us as an organisation was around the fact that you had these siloed pockets of training going on across the board, and we didn't have any central oversight over it. That's part of the reason why Assistant Commissioner Foster now sits as part of my senior leadership team, and the department she now has responsibility for has that oversight across the board, that although it will be subject matter experts delivering particular training interventions, whether it's in fire safety or in control, we have the oversight as part of the new strategy going forward to make sure it's being delivered to a quality that we would expect. So it's a mixed picture across the board. It's why the restructure of our learning and professional development department was so critical, to make sure that we had that central repository of all of the training that's going on across the board.
Thank you. Assistant Commissioner, I can see you want to come in, but just for the sake of time too, can I add a question as well, which is how are you ensuring this all provides value for money?
So firstly, Jonathan's quite right. Having that holistic view now not only helps me with the planning going forward for the training delivery plan and the competency-based training framework, but subsequently then, with that, I'm able to understand from a reporting point of view what has been achieved by our firefighters and officers on the ground, to subsequently look at their competencies and skills as a whole. An example of that is working with our operational resilience department and having that overview of what we've pushed out with regards to marauding terrorist attack, and obviously subsequently now having that on the run, so to speak, and actually that availability and capability as of the 5th of April this year with regards to our Priority 1 stations within Inner London. With regards to ensuring value for money, anything we do outside of the Babcock contract is obviously subject to the public contracts regulation. And obviously we engage with our procurement department to ensure that we get advice and support with regards to that and make sure that we're achieving value for money and it is cost effective.
Thank you. And Gareth, finally from me for today, I think the committee has heard very loudly and clearly, hopefully, that the fire brigade's chronically underinvested in. But from your point of view, what is the training provision like outside the Babcock training contract for your members?
So there's been some initial problems with the control training in the number of control staff and members that are there from the 3 unions, to be able to take them out of the control environment to train them, because of the numbers. I believe that's been a problem. I hope that's been addressed. Other than that, I've not heard anything negatively about the external ones.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And I'll go over to Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you. Joe, you said that there's nobody around the table that's been involved before the Babcock contract. I hate to tell you that yes, I was. And since 2010, I've been involved and very proud to have been involved with the Fire Brigade. Additional training costs in the LFB's 22-23 training plan of over 1.5 million were based on the assumption that 90 to 95% would be of an attendance rate. So can you confirm that that is the case? Anybody?
Yes, I believe it is, but I think as Assistant Commissioner Foster was alluding to earlier, we're still waiting for the final data and we'll be able to write back to the committee and confirm that as the case.
But you think it is?
I believe it is, yeah, but I would want to make sure that I can sense check that and then write back to the committee with the final figure.
Thank you. So what's the protocol if firefighters don't undertake training within a desired time period?
Is that within any particular skill? So there's risk critical elements. So obviously a lot of the training that's delivered centrally through Babcock is around driver training and revalidation, incident command revalidation, breathing apparatus. We have to make sure that all of our firefighters and officers sit within ticket. So we're looking to introduce something called a licence to operate going forward, which means if someone steps outside of that ticket for whatever reason that may be, that actually they come off the run, because actually we need to be assured as an organisation that they're receiving the training to keep them competent and to keep them capable of delivering the service that they have. Now, it was one of the areas that was picked up by the HMI back in 2019, particularly around driver training and incident command. And I'm pleased to report that our revalidation figures are in the high 90s across the board, whether it's driver training or whether it's level 1, 2, 3 and 4 incident command, and rightly so. Where we are moving to is around this licence to operate, that we can even take a harder edge, that actually if somebody does step outside of their revalidation time frame, that actually they would come off the run. But obviously we have to make sure we've got the resilience in place to see that happen. But I think now that we've got the revalidation training in such a better position that our percentages are up in the high 90s, we are in a position to move that forward, and we can take that. But individual firefighters are held to account. If they don't show up for training for whatever reason, they're held to account by line management. That's obviously a discussion that Keeley and Joe have on a monthly basis in terms of the DNA. So did not attend figures to make sure we understand why that's happening, and if that means people need to be held to account, they will be, or whether there's issues in the system where people weren't able to cancel contracts because there were childcare issues or whatever that may be, we're able to understand what that looks like.
Okay, thanks. What is a percentage, you think, of optional training undertaken by the staff?
So apologies, Assembly Member Hall.
Sorry, so volunteers to go to training that they're not necessarily required to do. What enthusiasm is there for you're smiling, for firefighters to go on training that they don't have to?
Well, I think one of the great things about the profession is that I'm yet to meet firefighters who aren't keen actually to engage in training. It obviously needs to be training that's relevant, that actually gives them the tools and equipment that they need to keep themselves, because there's their own personal safety element as well as anything else, and it's something that people have professional pride in. There are obviously key training competencies that we expect all firefighters to have, whether that's breathing apparatus, whether that's driver training if that's appropriate, and incident commanders to have. As I say, the bulk of the training they will receive is actually delivered by the watch officer on that station, and actually that'll be part of the watch officer's plans and responsibility actually for managing that watch, to go out onto the drill yard to make sure people are familiar with policy, procedure, the equipment that's carried on the appliance. And actually firefighters are always keen to do that, because that actually sets them up to be able to deliver the service in the most effective way and keep them safe. And dare I say, when we all join this profession, we do it because it's a practical profession. People enjoy going out onto the drill yard, they enjoy practicing breathing apparatus training, and that's what makes the profession what it is.
Okay, thank you. Very briefly, the training plan refers to the reintroduction of firefighter development training. What does that consist of, and why has it been introduced, and who's delivering it?
So I think that reference, and Keeley will be able to come in here as far as the training plan is concerned, but obviously we had a hold on firefighter development training as a result of the COVID pandemic, so that references the fact that we've been able to reinstigate the firefighter development programme post-pandemic, where obviously during the pandemic we had to pause it. Yep. So that's what that's referring to.
Fair enough. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And just before a final question, I'd like to welcome the Mayor of Barking, who's joined us in the public gallery. Assembly Member Cooper.
And finally. Yeah, it really is our final question, unbelievably. I'm going to start with you, really, Jonathan, actually, but anyone else who might want to come in. It's about the new 3-year training plan, which I understand is due to be agreed next month, and that it will develop and deliver new and innovative training to enable the brigade to meet all these ever-changing challenges. Can you tell us a little bit more about what is likely to be signed off next month, and are you definitely on track for signing that off? And I can see Keeley might want to come in as well.
Yeah, so I'll just give the very high level, and then I'll obviously invite Keeley in to give some of the details. So I'm particularly pleased that we've now got a 3-year training plan as opposed to the annual training cycle that we've used before, because actually some of what we've discussed within this committee actually requires investment and planning over a longer period, particularly around what the urban firefighting offer is going to look like, which is part of that longer term training plan going forward. At the moment, we are on course to have that training plan agreed. Obviously, colleagues in Babcock are currently considering it at the moment to make sure that they're able to meet our asks as far as that training plan is concerned. It's due to go before Service Delivery Board next month, once we've got that back from Babcock, to then agree that and then move forward with, as I say, the initial areas to address are around some of the workforce planning issues, i.e. more driver training in particular, but also other specialist areas. Then the BAU element that we need to cover off around things like our fire and rescue unit provision to make sure that specialist skills, USAR, that sort of area is covered. And then the longer term, which is the bit I'm particularly keen to see develop further, is around what that urban firefighting offer looks like, what our new counter-terror offer looks like, what our wildfire offer looks like, because that for me are the risks that we are going to face as an organisation over the course of the next few years. So we need to make sure our training provision is postured accordingly, but I'll invite Keeley to come.
Just before Keeley comes in, perhaps you can also cover the point about the need for firefighters to undertake training on their days off, because we have referred a few times to stress and mental health, and I can't see how we can truly address that for firefighters if we're saying you can't have days off because we need you to come in and do training, because actually having downtime outside of work, I find personally, I've just been to Dartmoor last week and I feel refreshed this week because I didn't do any work. I was in a valley where there was actually no Wi-Fi. It was fantastic. The phone didn't work. There is a need, and I was very struck by what Gareth was saying about firefighters having to do training on their days off. I think personally, I think that's wrong. Will the 3-year programme also be able to address that issue, so that we're expecting people to do the training over that period of time during their working hours, and not expecting people to use up, you know, really crucial days off? And I'm not even a firefighter, and I was feeling the need for a holiday.
Yes, I think you make a very good, valid point there. So it's one of the things we, again, are in agreement with, that we need to move to that model where the vast bulk of the training offer is delivered on work days and not on rota days. Now, there are some courses that require a particularly intense period over a length of time, particularly if we go into an external venue, you know, things like our water boat capability, for example, and real high-end specialist courses that are actually residential and you would need to do. But that's where the 3-year plan comes in, because actually our firefighters and officers and control staff are quite happy to do the training if they're able to plan it around their domestic their lives. Because I agree with you, the rota days are there for a reason. We want people to be able to have that downtime and be refreshed. You know, we need to move away from the 28-day notice practice that we've got at the moment in terms of training provision. And that was a consequence of the fact that we had the annual training cycle. As I say, we know what firefighters need to do. We're very clear on that. We can plan that in the medium and longer term, and that should then alleviate the need to train on rota days, albeit accepting that there will be specialist courses that
Totally understand that there will be some, but hopefully rare exceptions.
It should be the exception, not the rule. I completely agree.
Okay, Keeley.
Yes, thank you. Just to build on that, the plan aims, it's in 3 parts. So obviously, as we've said previously, it aims to close our skills gap in the first instance. It then aims to maintain our skills. And then subsequently, the third part is the part that gives us the greatest opportunity. And obviously, as Joanna has said, starts to tap into the flexibility that is there. But to be fair to Babcock previously, we've not always articulated that and articulated our needs in the right way. We aim to do that, and obviously it's going to be a rolling plan going forward. It is measured against our CRMP, and subsequently what we will do is we'll be publishing this, that'll be going through governance next month, but by next summer we aim to start to develop our subsequent plan that will see the duration of the CRMP to make sure all our needs are met. But the third part really does look at emerging risk and subsequently have a real risk-based approach. It also will encompass the adoption of national operational guidance as well. So we're working with what is our main commissioning department, operational policy and assurance, to make sure those aims are met. The second part of it that is really important for me is how it's delivered. So we've already touched on those elements, and actually there's lots that we can tap into. Subsequently, not only utilising on how we utilise our vehicles and equipment, and subsequently working with the team internally to make sure that they have the correct planning in process, and that 3 years allows us to do that, but also working with our property department as well with regards to the estates mapping strategy, and then from there starting to open up localised training hubs within areas, and start to really listen to our staff, as we have done already, around starting to push out training as a watch and localised training. And also, as Jonathan has touched on, once we've got a competency-based training framework, it's very open. It sets the expectation. People will see the time frames that they need to remain in ticket with regards to licence to operate, and we will give them the option to book onto training courses, which we've already started with some urban search and rescue courses already.
Thank you very much. That's everything from me. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our guests and all of those who joined us in the public gallery today. And thank you for your contributions today. We have a few short items of business before we conclude. You're welcome to stay, or you're welcome to dash out of here, whichever suits you. But this will just be a few minutes before we conclude. Can we note the report and today's discussion? Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output from this discussion? Agreed. And can we note the committee work programme and the meeting dates as agreed by the London Assembly at its annual meeting on the 4th of May 2023? Noted. The next meeting of this committee is scheduled for the 28th of June 2023 at 10 a.m. in the chamber at City Hall. And I have no other urgent business. I now declare this meeting to be closed. Thank you, Chair.
Please stand by.